Hey, it's Ashley. This story isn't really about danger. It's about what happens when the person who's supposed to keep you safe is also the one hiding the truth. Behind the Watch is about love that grows in the shadows, about the way trust feels warm right before it breaks, and how sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room is the one standing closest to you. So don't rush this. Let it sink in. Because once you start seeing what's really happening, you don't get to unsee it. The strobe lights painted Clementine's skin in fractured sapphire. Each flash burned an afterimage against her retinas, a ghost of herself, suspended in the roaring dark. Up here, on the balcony overlooking the warehouse-turned nightclub, the base was a physical presence, a dense pressure against her sternum. Below, the sea of bodies moved, as one entity, a single organism, undulating to the relentless electronic pulse. The air smelled of spilled champagne, expensive perfume, and the metallic tang of sweat. Another flash. And in that brief, brilliant moment, she saw him. Leo, a still point in the spinning chaos. He leaned against the railing not 10 feet from her, but he might as well have been on another continent. He didn't watch the writhing crowd, or the DJ haloed in violet light. He watched the doors, the emergency exits, the shadowed upper rafters. His dark suit was immaculate. His posture relaxed but coiled, like a big cat waiting for something to pounce. He was the only thing in this manufactured frenzy that wasn't performing. Amazing view, right? A man's voice, too close, slick with the kind of confidence that money bought. A producer. His name escaped her, one of a dozen she'd been forced to smile for tonight. He gestured with his glass, the amber liquid sloshing. The whole city at your feet. Clementine's smile was a carefully constructed piece of architecture. It didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. She didn't turn from the railing. She could feel Leo's gaze shift. A slight, almost imperceptible movement as it landed on the producer. Assessed, dismissed. The tiny gesture sent an unwelcome shiver of warmth through her. They say you're a lock for the Delacorte Award. The man pressed on, oblivious. That scene in Ashfall, when you're in the rain. Christ. People were weeping in the aisles. I remember the rain, she said. Her voice quiet. She remembered the cold hose on a backlot in Burbank. The director screaming through a megaphone. The feeling of being utterly and completely hollowed out. It was very wet. A beat of silence. The producer was waiting for more. For the anecdote. The charming Hollywood story. She had none to give. She felt a presence shift beside her. And there was Leo. He had moved without a sound. A fluid slide through the space between them. Mens DeWitt has a call she needs to take, Leo said. His tone was flat, polite, but it carried the absolute finality of a closing door. A private matter. The producer's smile faltered. He looked from Leo's impassive face to Clementine, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Of course. My apologies. He retreated, swallowed by the crowd. They were alone again, the space between them humming with the thrum of the bass and a dozen unspoken things. She didn't turn to him. A private matter, she asked, the words barely audible above the music. A necessary fiction, he replied, his own gaze back on scanning the room. He was making you uncomfortable. It wasn't a question. He noticed. He always noticed. He noticed the way she held her shoulders when she was cornered, the way her fingers traced patterns on the stem of a glass. He saw the things she thought she was hiding, the cracks in the porcelain facade. "Thank you," she said, finally turning to face him. In the shifting colored light, his features were a study in contrasts: sharp jaw, soft mouth, eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. "You're very perceptive for a guard." "The job," he said. A slight shrug. The motion was economical. Everything about him is to see. Everything. Everything. The word hung between them. She was no longer talking about the party. She was talking about the letters, the ones that started as fan mail and curdled into something else. The photos of her sleeping, taken through her bedroom window. The dead bird left on her doorstep with its neck broken. The police called it a pattern of escalating harassment. Her agent called it a publicity nightmare. Leo called it a credible threat. "Everything relevant," he corrected. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second too long. For that sliver of time, the noise of the club, the lights, the entire constructed world fell away. There was only the dense, charged air between them. "Is this relevant?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. She took a half step closer. The fabric of his sleeve brushed against her bare arm. The contact was electric, a jolt that had nothing to do with the club's energy. Leo's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked away, his focus snapping back to the crowd. But the shift in him was palpable. He had gone from coiled to rigid. "Mr. Witt," he said, and the formal name was a wall being thrown up between them. "We should go. Your car is waiting." The warmth that had bloomed in her chest turned to ice. The rejection was so clean, so professional. It was worse than a harsh word. It was a confirmation that the space he occupied was one she could never enter. He was the protector. She was the principal. A line had been crossed, and he was neatly, surgically erasing it. "Of course," she said, her own smile sliding back into place, the cool, untouchable mask, "lead the way." As they moved through the throng, his body a solid, reassuring presence just behind her, she caught a glimpse of his profile in the strobing light. His phone was out, angled away from her. He was texting. In the half-second before the screen went dark, she didn't see a message to security or the driver. She saw a name, a single word. Serafina. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he typed it, the slight tension in his thumb, the way he immediately tucked the phone away when he sensed her gaze. It felt like a secret. A crack in the polished surface of Leo the Protector. A hint of another man entirely. A man hiding in the shadows of the threats he was supposed to be helping her understand. And for the first time that night, looking at the back of his neck as he shouldered their way through the crowd, Clementine felt a flicker of fear that had nothing to do with letters or dead birds. It was the chilling, specific fear of realizing the man guarding the cage might not be the only one with a key. The ride back in the blacked-out SUV was suffocating. The city lights bled across the tinted windows, amorphous streaks of gold and crimson that did little to illuminate the cavernous interior. Clementine sat in the back, the plush leather swallowing her small frame. Leo sat opposite her, a dark silhouette against the passing blur. He hadn't spoken a word since they left the club. The silence was an accusation. Her gaze drifted to the driver. A new face tonight. A broad man, with a neck like a tree trunk, staring straight ahead. Leo's replacement for the night, he'd said. A temporary measure while the primary team was rotated. She'd nodded, accepting the information like she accepted her lines of dialogue, without question. Now, the detail felt sharp and foreign. She remembered the name on the screen, Serafina. It sounded like an angel or a song. It didn't sound like a security protocol. It sounded like a secret. The SUV purred to a stop in the underground garage of her building. Concrete walls swallowed the sound. The driver got out, circled around to open her door. Leo was already out, moving with that silent, predatory grace, scanning the empty levels of the parking structure. He was always scanning. Her apartment was a penthouse, a glass box perched over the sprawling city. It was supposed to feel safe, a fortress in the sky. But tonight, the floor-to-ceiling windows felt like a vulnerability, a giant, unblinking eye. She went to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, and poured a glass of water. She could hear Leo's soft tread as he did his perimeter check, the click of a lock being engaged, the subtle shift of a security panel, the sounds of protection, of a carefully curated bubble. "Everything's secure for the night," he said, appearing in the doorway of the kitchen. He kept his distance, near the living room, a formal, respectful space. "I'll be in the command center. One button alert on the panel by your bed." "Thank you, Leo." She leaned against the counter, her knuckles white around her glass. "You're very thorough." "It's the job." Same phrase. Same wall. "Is it?" she asked, her voice sharp in the quiet room. "Is it the job to know which kind of tea I prefer when I can't sleep? Or to have a blanket waiting in the car because you know I get cold? To know the exact shade of my eyeshadow without ever looking at a makeup compact?" Leo stood perfectly still. The only movement was the slight rise and fall of his chest. His face was in shadow, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "I observe details. It's a necessary skill." "You observe too much," she countered. "And you share too little." She took a step toward him, abandoning the pretense of nonchalance. "Who is Serafina?" The name hung in the air between them, a small, sharp weapon. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. His posture didn't change, but the atmosphere in the room shifted, grew dense, electric, like the air before a storm. "That's not relevant to your security, Miss DeWitt." His voice was colder now, stripped of its previous, faint warmth. "I think it is," she pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I think you're holding something back. The police have no leads. The letters, the bird, they've gone cold. But you're still here. You're not just a bodyguard, are you? This isn't just about me. Your safety is my only priority." The words were a vow, but they felt hollow. "Is it?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Or am I just part of something else? A piece on a board?" The thought was terrifying, a sudden gaping abyss beneath her feet. The fame, the career, the persona. It all felt like a flimsy stage set, and someone was pulling wires from behind the curtain. Leo's expression softened, just a fraction, a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity? Regret? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You need to rest. You have an early call." He turned to leave. "Don't you walk away from me," she said, the words catching in her throat. He stopped at the doorway, his back to her. His shoulders were a rigid line. "Go to bed, Clementine." He used her first name. It wasn't a gesture of intimacy. It was a command. The finality of it struck her with the force of a physical blow. She watched him disappear down the hallway toward the secure room he used, the one with the monitors and the scrambled phone lines. She was alone again, in her glass fortress, with the name Serafina echoing in the silence. Sleep was impossible. She lay in bed, the silk sheets a cool, useless balm against her heated skin. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, was a potential threat. Her mind replayed the night, the strobing lights, the producer's slick smile, Leo's sudden cold withdrawal, and that one damning word on his phone screen. Hours later, when the city outside her window was bathed in the pre-dawn gray, she slipped out of bed. She moved without a sound, a skill she'd learned from him. The floorboards didn't creak. She didn't turn on any lights, navigating the familiar terrain of her apartment by memory and the ambient glow of the city. She went to the command center. The door was locked, of course, a state-of-the-art biometric lock. But her father, an eccentric tech billionaire who died when she was a teenager, had built this place. And he'd been paranoid. He'd always left a back door. In the master bathroom, behind a panel of mirrored tiles, was a small, almost invisible keypad. It was a maintenance override, a system her father had insisted she memorize as a teenager, along with her social security number and the recipe for his favorite spaghetti carbonara. She hadn't thought of it in years. Her fingers trembled as she punched in the 12-digit code. A soft click. The panel slid open, revealing not plumbing, but a narrow, dark passage. A dust bunny the size of her fist trembled in the sudden draft. She squeezed through, the space smelling of concrete and disuse. It led to a crawl space behind the main server rack in the command center. Through the slats of the vent, she could see the room. It was exactly as she'd imagined. Banks of monitors glowed, showing different angles of her apartment, the garage, the lobby. Leo was there, sitting in a high-backed chair, facing the largest screen. He wasn't watching the feeds. He was on a video call. The connection was jittery, the face on the screen a composite of pixelated squares and frozen moments. But it was a woman. Dark hair pulled back severely from a face that was all sharp angles and intense eyes. She looked like a hawk. "The package is secure," Leo was saying, his voice a low murmur. "No sign of external contact. But she's getting suspicious." "Suspicion is a liability, Leo," the woman's voice crackled back. It was sharp, devoid of emotion. "You knew the parameters of this assignment. Contain the asset. Observe. Do not engage." "I am not engaging," he countered, a strain in his tone. "But she's not an idiot, Serafina. She's putting pieces together. The lack of progress from the local PD is making her ask questions. Then misdirect her. You're resourceful. We didn't pull you from deep cover to get spooked by a movie star's intuition." The woman, Serafina, leaned closer to her camera. Her face filled the screen, a mosaic of resolve and impatience. "The source is close. We know he's using her as a conduit. We just need to know who. The letters are a symptom, not the disease. Your job is to watch for the infection." "And if he makes a move?" Leo asked. "Then you stop him. That is your secondary objective. The primary is intelligence. Do not forget that." "I won't." "Good." Serafina's image flickered and died. The screen went black, reflecting back the ghostly image of the room. Clementine didn't breathe. Her lungs burned. Asset. Conduit. Deep cover. The words were knives, flaying her reality. She wasn't a person. She was a thing. A strategic point in a war she knew nothing about. The dead bird on her doorstep wasn't a threat from a crazed fan, it was a message in a language of violence she couldn't decipher. The letters weren't about her. They were about someone else, using her fame, her life, as a shield. And Leo, the man she was starting to. The man who felt her fear before she did, who knew her tea preference, who stood between her and the world. He wasn't her protector. He was her warden. Silent, she retreated the way she came, easing the panel shut. The click of it settling back into place sounded like a gunshot in the quiet of the bathroom. She stood there for a long moment, her reflection in the mirror a pale, hollow-eyed stranger. The actress, the facade, was gone. All that was left was Clementine, and she was furious. She walked back into her bedroom, but she didn't lie down. She went to her closet, pushing past racks of designer gowns and tailored suits. In the back, on a high shelf, was a locked box. The key was in a hollowed-out copy of The Sun Also Rises on her nightstand. Her father's things. Inside were old photographs, a silver Zippo lighter, and a small, slim satellite phone, military grade. He'd given it to her when she turned 18. In case the world gets noisy, he'd said with a wink. This is a whisper. She had never thought to use it. Her thumb, surprisingly steady, pressed the power button. A small green light blinked to life. She didn't know who to call. She just knew she couldn't stay here, trapped in this gilded cage, waiting for Leo's handlers to decide her fate. She typed a single number she knew by heart, the one person left in the world who was truly, uncomplicatedly hers. Her older brother, Julian, a disgraced investigative journalist who now spent his days writing exposés on corporate malfeasance for obscure online journals and his nights drinking whiskey in a rundown apartment downtown. He was a mess, but he was a bloodhound. He answered on the third ring, his voice a gravelly, sleep-riddled rasp. "Lo?" "Julian," she whispered. "It's me. Clem? What the hell? It's 3 a.m. Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" He was instantly awake, the protective big brother she'd spent years pushing away. "Not Leo," she said, the name tasting like poison. "The other one. My bodyguard. He's not who he says he is. None of this is what I thought." The call ended with the finality of a slammed door. She pocketed the phone and sat on the edge of her bed, a plan coalescing from the chaos. She had to act normal. She had to be Clementine DeWitt, the actress, on her way to a film set. She would play the part of a lifetime. Morning light sliced through the penthouse, mercilessly bright. Clementine moved through her morning routine with a mechanical precision that would have made any acting coach proud. She showered, dressed in the simple jeans and cashmere sweater wardrobe had laid out for her day-off scenes in the film. She drank her coffee, black, exactly as Leo had noted. When he emerged from the command center, his suit crisp, his face a mask of professional indifference, she offered him a small, tired smile. "Rough night," she said, her artfully applied concealer hiding the sleepless circles. "Ready when you are." He gave a curt nod, his eyes scanning her, looking for any sign of a fracture. He wouldn't find one. She had built her walls too high. The ride to the studio lot was quiet. She watched the city wake up through the tinted windows, seeing it all for the first time as the stage it was. The driver was the same broad man from the night before. Leo sat opposite her, a silent, unreadable sentinel. She could feel the weight of his deception, a physical presence, in the car. At the studio gates, the usual pandemonium erupted. Paparazzi swarmed the SUV, a frenzy of flashing bulbs and shouted questions. As Leo and the driver moved to form a human shield, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd, a man pushing against the velvet rope, shouting her name. "Clementine! Clementine, you have to listen to me! They're using you!" Security converged on him instantly, but not before Clementine got a clear look. He was young, gaunt, with a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He wasn't a fan. He wasn't a photographer. He looked terrified. Leo was there, a firm grip on her arm. "Don't look. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. In that split second before the man was dragged away, Their eyes met, and she saw it. The same fear she now felt. A recognition of a shared, hidden enemy. She was on set, sitting in a canvas chair, a PA hovering with a bottle of water, when her phone buzzed. It was a burner, an untraceable model Julian had given her years ago after a particularly nasty tabloid story. She ignored the production designer trying to explain the lighting for the next scene and thumbed the screen open. A single text from Julian: parking lot B, black sedan. Now, she stood up, ignoring the calls of her name. "I'll be right back," she said to her beleaguered assistant. "I just need some air." Leo started to rise. "I'll accompany you." "God, no," she said, forcing a laugh. "I'm just going to the craft services truck. It's 10 feet away. I think I can manage without a tactical escort for 30 seconds. She let a hint of the Hollywood diva creep into her tone. It was the perfect camouflage. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the duty versus the need to maintain a low profile. Duty won. "I'll be right here," he said, not quite sitting down. Clementine didn't walk toward craft services. She slipped behind a soundstage, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The air back here was different, smelling of sawdust, paint, and hot metal. She ran, her flat silent on the asphalt. Parking lot B was a graveyard of forgotten equipment and studio vehicles. At the far end, under the shade of a massive, dusty backdrop of a mountain range, sat a black sedan. A figure leaned against the driver's side door. Julian. He looked worse than he sounded. Thin, with a face that seemed to be all sharp angles and tired lines. But his eyes, when they fixed on her, were bright and fiercely intelligent. He opened his arms as she ran to him, folding her into a hug that smelled of stale coffee and cheap soap and safety. "You're okay," he murmured into her hair. "For now," she pulled back, her own eyes wild. "Julian, what is going on? The name on the phone, the call. He called me an asset." Julian's expression hardened. He glanced around, then opened the passenger door of the sedan. "Get in. Not much time." She slid into the worn leather seat. He got in the other side, the engine already purring. "Okay," he said, turning to face her. "This is going to be a lot. Dad. He wasn't just a tech billionaire, Clem. He was in the intelligence game, private sector. Off-the-books analysis for government contracts, corporate espionage, the whole 9 yards. He built a network." Clementine stared at him. "Dad." The man who wore socks with sandals and cried at the end of E.T. "The same," Julian said grimly. "It was his real legacy, not the money. When he died, the network didn't just go away, it fractured. One faction is led by someone called Serafina. They're cleanup artists, ruthless. The other faction is a remnant of Dad's original team. Good guys, theoretically." "The guy at the gate," she breathed. "He was from one of these factions?" Julian nodded. "Name's Micah. Worked with Dad. He's been trying to get to you for weeks. I vetted him. He's legit. He says Serafina's crew is using you." "As a conduit," she whispered, the word echoing in her mind. "Leo said that." "Your bodyguard." Julian's jaw tightened. "He's Serafina's. An elite field operative. Pulled from a deep cover assignment in Eastern Europe for this. His name isn't even Leo. It's Leonid Petrov, ex-Spetsnaz. That's why he's so good." Clementine felt the world tilt. The quiet, perceptive man who knew her tea order. He was a ghost, a character invented by a Russian spy. The warmth she'd felt was a lie, a tool of the trade. "Why me, Julian? What am I a conduit for?" "Dad," Julian said, his voice dropping. "They think he left something behind. A kill switch. A dead man's switch. A key that would unlock everything, Serafina's operations. Her clients. The whole rotten apple cart. They think he hid the trigger with someone he trusted implicitly. Someone outside the life. Someone they'd never look at. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. Her. He had left it with her. In a memory, a conversation, an object she hadn't thought of in years. She was a living key. The letters, she said, her voice trembling. The bird. They're not from a stalker. They're signals, Julian confirmed. A warning from a rival faction, or a provocation from Seraphina's people, trying to see if the asset is responsive. They're watching you, Clem. They're waiting for you to trip the wire, to accidentally reveal whatever it is you're carrying. A frantic knocking on the driver's side window made them both jump. It was Micah, the man from the gate. His face was pale, sweaty. We have to go, now. Petrov's on the move. He knows she's missing. Julian cursed under his breath. Get in the back, Clem. Lie down. She scrambled over the seat as Micah jumped in. The sedan peeled out of the parking space, kicking up a cloud of dust. Clementine lay on the floor, the rough carpet pressing into her cheek, the smell of old fast food wrappers filling her nostrils. This was her new reality, hiding on the floor of a beat-up car with her disgraced brother and a paranoid ex-agent. Where are we going? Julian asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Off the grid, Micah said, twisting in his seat to look down at her. His eyes were intense, feverish. Clementine, did Petrov ever ask you about your father? Specifically, about anything from when you were a teenager? Anything about objects? Mementos? She thought back. The carefully curated questions, the casual probing. No, never. He was Aden, she faltered. He was trying to get to know me. To make you trust him, Micah said flatly. That was his playbook. We have to assume Seraphina knows the trigger is tied to a memory, an emotional connection. They'll be trying to trigger you emotionally, make you feel safe or scared or... He trailed off. Or fall in love with him, she finished, the words tasting like ash. The ultimate betrayal, using her own loneliness, her own budding feelings, as a weapon. The car hit a pothole, jolting her. She squeezed her eyes shut. The memory of her father's face swam behind her lids. Not the sad, nostalgic version, but the other one. The one she tried to forget. A year before he died, he'd taken her camping. Just the two of them. In the biting cold of the Sierra Nevadas. She'd been miserable, complaining, a bratty teenager. He'd been patient, teaching her to fish, to read the stars. On the last night, he'd given her a smooth, flat stone from the riverbed, gray and unremarkable. He'd held it in his palm, a strange, intense look on his face. This is a memory stone, Clem, he'd said. If you ever forget who you are, or what's important, hold it tight. The truth is in the weight of it. She'd rolled her eyes and tossed it into her backpack, forgetting it completely. Her eyes flew open. A cold dread washed over her. The stone, she whispered. Julian glanced back at her. What stone? Dad gave me a stone. A river stone. He told me. He said the truth was in the weight. Her mind raced, connecting the cryptic phrase to what Julian had said. The trigger. It's the stone. Where is it? Micah demanded, his voice urgent. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to remember. I don't know. My old room. At the house in Malibu. It was packed away after he died. The Malibu house, sold years ago. The contents auctioned off, donated, or thrown in storage. a needle in a continent of haystacks. "We need to get to the storage facility," Julian said. "The one in Van Nuys. Everything from the house was put there." "We can't," Micah said, his voice tight. "Petrov and the Serafina network will have flagged your brother's name, your name, all known associates. The second we access that unit under our own names, they'll be on us." He paused, thinking. "But I know a guy, a ghost. He can get us in." The sedan sped down the 405, a metallic speck in the river of traffic. Clementine lay on the floor, the carpet itching her skin, her mind replaying the conversation in the command center. The source is close. He's using her as a conduit. The source. Was it one of her co-stars? Her agent? The director who'd screamed at her in the rain? Paranoia was a cold serpent, coiling in her gut. Everyone was a suspect. An hour later, they pulled into a dusty industrial park in the valley. Micah disappeared inside a graffiti-covered warehouse, reappearing with a wiry man in stained coveralls, who barely looked at them. He led them to a cavernous, climate-controlled warehouse. Row upon row of yellow lockers stretched into the gloom. "Unit 734, the man grunted, handing Julian a key. 10 minutes. They found the unit, jammed with the dusty relics of their childhood. Clementine's old bed frame wrapped in plastic, boxes of her mother's old clothes, and, in the back, a stack of her school things. Tears pricked her eyes as she tore open boxes. Yearbooks, binders filled with notes, faded photographs. It was a life she barely recognized, a girl who felt like a distant cousin. Then her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth, in an old, beaten-up copy of Moby Dick. The stone. It was just as she remembered. Flat, gray, ordinary. But when she picked it up, it felt wrong. It was heavier than it should be. Much heavier. She turned it over in her palm. There was a hairline crack, almost invisible along the edge. She pressed her thumb into it. A small section of the stone clicked, sliding open to reveal a hollow interior. Nestled inside was not a key or a microchip, but a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper. The kind of paper used in old-fashioned typewriters. Her hands trembled as she unrolled it. There was a single line of text, typed in her father's familiar, slightly misaligned font. "The quietest parts sing the loudest." "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice choked. "It's a riddle." Julian stared at it, his brow furrowed. "A code? Book title?" "It's not a code," Micah said, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. He looked from the stone to Clementine, a new, terrifying understanding in his face. He didn't hide a digital key. He hid an analog one. He pointed a shaking finger at the paper. "That's a line from a poem he used to recite to her. The quietest parts. He's talking about the silent sections on a vinyl record." Clementine's blood ran cold. Her father's record collection. Thousands of rare, pristine vinyls. They were still in the Malibu house. The house that had been sold. "Who bought it?" Julian asked, his voice urgent. "I know," Clementine whispered, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. "Valentina Cortez." Valentina Cortez. An enigmatic, reclusive billionaire art collector. The kind of woman who bought entire estates just to acquire a single painting. Clementine had met her once, at a gallery opening. A beautiful, cold woman with hands like carved marble and eyes that saw right through you. The floor of the storage unit seemed to drop away. The source was close. The threat had been living under their noses all along. Serafina, Micah breathed. Valentina Cortez is Serafina. Before they could process the revelation, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt outside the open garage door of the warehouse. The door slid shut with a deafening bang, plunging them into near darkness. They were trapped. "Back of the unit!" Micah yelled, pulling a gun from a shoulder holster Clementine hadn't known he was carrying. Julian shoved her behind a tower of boxes. "Stay down." The sound of footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. Not just one set, a whole team. Then, a voice. A voice she knew better than her own. "Clementine," it called out, calm and steady. "This is over. Come out. I don't want you to get hurt." Leo. Leonid. The name she had dared to feel something for was now the sound of her impending doom. She peeked through a gap in the boxes. He was there, moving with fluid purpose, flanked by two other men in tactical gear. His face was a mask of concentration, the warm, perceptive man from the balcony completely gone. This was the predator, in its natural habitat. This was Leonid Petrov, the Spetsnaz operative. Micah returned fire, the shots deafening in the enclosed space, the smell of cordite sharp and acrid. One of the tactical men went down with a cry. But there were more of them. They were professionals. A canister flew through the air and landed near their position. White smoke began to billow out, a thick, choking cloud. "Gas!" Julian yelled, pulling his shirt up over his face. "Hold your breath." Clementine's lungs were already burning. Her vision swam. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on the leg of an old wooden chair. She fell hard, the back of her head cracking against the concrete floor. Stars burst behind her eyes. Through the haze, she saw a figure looming over her. Leo. He kicked Micah's gun away. He knelt, his face inches from hers, the gas swirling around them like a shroud. His expression was unreadable. "Give me the stone, Clementine," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Tears streamed from her eyes, a mix of gas and rage, and a profound, heart-shattering betrayal. She clutched the stone to her chest. "You lied to me," she choked out. "All of it. A lie." "My job," he said, and the words were a bullet to her soul. "The stone. Now." She saw it then, in his eyes. A flicker. Just for a second. Not the cold calculation of an agent. Not the pity of a guard. It was something else. A conflict. A desperate, buried plea. He wasn't just following orders. He was trapped, too. "The quietest parts sing the loudest," she whispered, her vision tunneling. "What does it mean, Leo?" For a fraction of a second, his composure fractured. His gaze darted to the right, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement toward a stack of old stereo equipment. Turntables, amps, speakers. Then the mask was back. "Don't make this harder," he said, his hand reaching for the stone she held. Before he could touch her, a blur of motion came from the side. Julian, wild-eyed and desperate, swung an old floor lamp like a club. It caught Leonid on the shoulder. The operative grunted in surprise, stumbling back. It was the opening they needed. Micah was on his feet, grabbing Clementine, hauling her up. "This way." They ran, blind, through the choking smoke toward the back wall. Julian fumbled with a heavy fire exit door, the panic mechanism screeching in protest. It burst open, spilling them into the harsh sunlight of an alley. They didn't stop. They ran, lungs screaming, until they were blocks away, collapsing in the shade behind a dumpster. The sounds of the city a distant, alien hum. Clementine's head throbbed. The stone was still clutched in her hand, its unnatural weight a grim anchor to reality. "He let us go," she panted, looking at Julian and Micah. "Did you see?" He looked at the record players. Micah, clutching a bleeding wound on his arm, shook his head. "He didn't let us go. We got lucky." He was focused on the objective. "He'll be back." "No," she insisted, a strange, terrifying clarity settling over her. "He told me. The quietest parts aren't just the grooves in a record. It's a specific record. My dad's favorite. A copy of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. He used to play it all the time. He said the silence between the notes was where the real music was." The memory was so vivid, she could almost hear the saxophone's mournful cry. "It's in the Malibu house, with the rest of the collection. Valentina Cortez's Malibu estate. A fortress on a cliff, overlooking the endless, indifferent ocean. Getting in would be impossible. Getting out, with the key that could topple an empire, would be a suicide mission." 2 days later, Clementine stood on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, the wind whipping her dress around her legs. She looked the part, the famous actress, seeking a quiet retreat. But her hands were trembling, hidden in the pockets of her silk coat. The plan was madness. A high-wire act with no net. It had been Julian's idea. "She won't expect you to walk right up to the front door," he'd said, a manic gleam in his eye. "Arrogance is a weakness. We'll use it." They'd used her connections, calling in a favor from a powerful producer who owed her career a boost. A simple request. Clementine DeWitt, deeply affected by the recent stalker incident, wanted to get out of the city. She'd heard that Valentina Cortez was a fan of her work and would be honored if she could borrow the guest house at her famous Malibu estate for a few days of rest and privacy. The request was so audacious, so steeped in Hollywood's culture of entitlement, that it was granted. And so here she was. A car was sent. A gatekeeper escorted her up the winding drive. The house was a brutalist marvel of concrete and glass, jutting out over the cliffs like the prow of a ship. Valentina Cortez was there to greet her. She was even more intimidating than Clementine remembered. Dressed in a simple black sheath, her dark hair coiled in a severe chignon, she moved with the unnerving stillness of a panther. Her handshake was cool, dry, and brief. "A pleasure, Miss DeWitt," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr that held no warmth. "Your privacy is paramount here. My staff has been instructed not to disturb you." "Thank you," Clementine said, her own performance award-worthy. "I just need some quiet." "The quiet can be revealing," Valentina replied, her dark eyes lingering on Clementine for a moment too long. A chill, deep and invasive, snaked down Clementine's spine. She knew. The guest house was a small, self-contained glass box, separated from the main house by a minimalist Zen garden. It was beautiful, and it was a cage. From the window, she could see the main house and a low, sprawling building attached to its side. The library. Her father's library. Her phone, the burner, buzzed. "Julian, go." Clementine waited until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the garden. She slipped out the back door of the guest house, not toward the main residence, but toward the cliffs. The plan was a distraction. While she walked on the beach, Julian, posing as a lost hiker, would create a commotion at the front gate, drawing the attention of the private security. It was a thin, desperate thread of hope. She didn't make it to the beach. As she rounded a corner of manicured hedges, she found him waiting for her. Leonid. He was not in a suit. He wore dark tactical pants and a fitted black shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful lines of his body. He looked like what he was, a weapon, sheathed in human skin. He stood between her and the path to the library, an immovable object. "Did you really think it would be this easy?" he asked. His voice was devoid of the gentle undertones she'd imagined. It was all business. "Leonid," she said, his real name feeling foreign and dangerous on her tongue. "That's not my name anymore," he said, taking a step toward her. "And you are not the frightened actress you're pretending to be." "No," she agreed, standing her ground. "I'm not. I'm my father's daughter." That stopped him, a flicker in those unreadable eyes. "Your father was a brilliant, paranoid, sentimental fool. He got himself killed playing games he couldn't win." "He played you," she countered. "He hid the key right under your employer's nose." A ghost of a smile touched Leonid's lips, a bitter, fleeting thing. "Serafina is not my employer. She is my creditor, a debt I am repaying." The admission was a crack in the armor, a dangerous, revealing crack. "By using me? By making me trust you?" The question was laced with a venom she didn't know she possessed. "I never lied about the threat," he said, his gaze dropping for a second. "The danger to you is real. There are other players, rivals, people who would kill you for a rumor of what you carry." He looked back at her, and this time, she saw the conflict plain on his face. "But Serafina wants the key more, and she always gets what she wants." "Why?" she pressed. "What is on that record? Ledgers, Black Ops budgets, names, proof of deals that would topple governments, start wars. Your father was the architect of the system. His death was an inconvenience. The dead man's switch he built was an insult to her." The sound of raised voices drifted from the front of the estate. "Julian." The distraction was working. Leonid's head turned slightly, a trained reflex. That was her opening. She darted to the side, not away from him, but past him, toward the low-slung library. He was faster, catching her arm, his grip like iron. "Don't," he warned, his face inches from hers. His breath was warm on her cheek. "There's no way out of that building. She's in there. The library is her sanctum. The stone says the quietest parts sing the loudest," she whispered, her mind racing. "My father loved that record. He'd hide it there, in plain sight, in a place only he would think to look." Leonid's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He understood. He'd been there, with her, searching the memory. "The runoff groove," he breathed. "At the end of the record, before it lifts. A micro groove, etched by hand." "Let me go," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Help me. This debt you're repaying, is this how you want to pay it?" by being the tool that destroys the only good thing he left behind. He stared at her, his grip loosening. The war in his eyes was a terrifying, beautiful storm. He was a man balanced on a razor's edge between two impossible lives. In that moment, she wasn't just an asset or a principle. She was a choice. Go, he said, his voice a ragged whisper. He released her arm. Through the north entrance. I will secure your exit. But you have 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the hedges, moving toward the front gate, toward the commotion. He was going to cover her, to delay, to choose. Clementine didn't hesitate. She ran to the north entrance of the library, a heavy, ornate oak door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, plunging into a world of leather-bound silence and the scent of aging paper. It was a cathedral to forgotten things. And there, in the center of the vast room, standing before a wall of vinyl records, was Valentina Cortez. I was wondering how long it would take you, she said, not turning around. Her voice was smooth as polished jet. She lifted a record from its sleeve. It was John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Your father had excellent taste, but he was a sentimentalist, and sentimentality is a fatal flaw. Clementine froze, her blood turning to ice. The distraction. It had never been a distraction. It had been a lure. Julian, Clementine whispered, a dread colder than the ocean wind filling her lungs. Oh, he's quite safe, Valentina said, finally turning. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. For now, my men are having a conversation with him. But his fate is tied to yours. Give me the stone, Clementine. And I might let your brothers see another sunrise. She held out a delicate, perfectly manicured hand. This was it. The checkmate. The end of the line. She had the key, but she'd lost the game. Her brother's life was the price. But in that moment of absolute despair, something hard and cold shifted inside her. The actress, the daughter, the asset, they all fell away, leaving something new. Something forged in the lies and betrayals of the last 48 hours. She walked forward, not toward Valentina, but toward a long mahogany table in the center of the room. On it sat an old, high-end turntable, the kind audiophiles dream of, the very one her father had owned. You want the stone? Clementine asked, her voice clear and steady. She held it up. The key to your whole kingdom. Valentina's smile widened. You're smarter than you look. My father taught me a few things, Clementine said, her gaze fixed on the record player. He taught me that a good story has a twist. She placed the stone on the table, a heavy gray anchor. But he also taught me that sometimes the most important part of the story is the one that gets burned. In one fluid motion, she snatched the Coltrane record from Valentina's nerveless fingers. With her other hand, she grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart and smashed it against the table. Shards of glass flew. She grabbed the largest, sharpest shard, its wicked edge glinting in the low light. The micro-groove, she said, her voice a raw, fierce cry. He wouldn't hide it where you could find it. He'd hide it where you'd never think to look. He etched the reverse side of the master recording, the B side of the truth. Before Valentina could react, Clementine placed the record on the turntable, but not to play it, She slammed the shard of glass down onto the vinyl, right at the beginning of the run-out groove. She scraped, her arm screaming in protest, the sound a hideous, screeching tear as she carved a deep gouge into the lacquer. Peeling back a thin layer of the black vinyl, she revealed a shimmering, magnetic strip hidden beneath, a data strip. At that exact moment, all the lights in the library went out. The darkness was absolute, a sudden, suffocating blanket. The chaos was instantaneous. The heavy oak door splintered inwards, kicked from the outside. The flat, percussive crack of gunfire echoed in the cavernous space, far louder and more brutal in the dark. It wasn't the controlled suppression fire from the storage unit. It was a full-scale assault. A body thudded to the floor nearby, followed by a gurgling cry. Clementine didn't hesitate. She dropped to the ground, her fingers scrabbling for the data strip, which had been dislodged by her desperate act. Her hands found the cold, flexible material just as a strong arm wrapped around her waist, hauling her up and back. "Don't struggle," a familiar voice growled in her ear. Leonid. He moved her with brutal efficiency, shielding her body with his own, pushing her toward a dark recess in the bookshelves she hadn't seen before. "Stay here. Do not move." He was gone before she could answer, dissolving into the tactical chaos. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a strobing, hellish red. The scene was a tableau of controlled violence. 2 of Serafina's men were down. The other 3, including the broad-shouldered driver from the SUV, were pinned down behind a massive desk, trading fire with figures moving with impossible speed from the broken doorway. Julian stood in the doorway, a smoking pistol in his hand, his face a mask of grim triumph. Beside him stood Micah, bloodied but resolute. They hadn't been captured. They had brought the cavalry. Valentina Cortez was not cowering. She stood behind the main desk, a sleek, silver pistol in her hand, her face a mask of cold fury. She was not the target. Clementine was. Leo moved like a phantom, a silent wraith of violence in the red-lit room. He took down one of the guards with a quiet, efficient snap of the neck, then another. He was clearing a path. "Go!" Julian yelled at her, pointing toward the far end of the library, the service tunnel. Clementine scrambled from her hiding place, the data strip clutched in her fist like a prayer. She ran, her feet silent on the plush Persian rug. She was almost to the door Julian indicated when she saw Leo and Valentina converge. They weren't fighting each other. They were both moving to cut off her escape. Leo reached her first, grabbing her arm. "This way!" he yelled, pulling her not toward the exit, but toward a large tapestry depicting a grim hunting scene. "Leo, no!" she cried, trying to pull away. "My debt," he grunted, yanking the tapestry aside to reveal a heavy steel door. "It ends tonight." He keyed in a code on a hidden keypad, and the door hissed open. But Valentina was there, her pistol raised. "You pathetic, sentimental fool," she snarled, her sights not on Clementine, but on Leo. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a contingency for my best weapon? A kill switch, just like your beloved mentor?" She squeezed the trigger. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but Leo was already moving. He twisted, pulling Clementine with him, putting his own body between her and the bullet. The impact threw him against her, a heavy, staggering weight. A grunt of pain escaped his lips, raw and real. He didn't fall. He staggered backward through the open steel door, dragging her with him. Julian and Micah opened fire on Valentina, forcing her back behind the desk as the heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in darkness. They were in a concrete corridor, starkly lit by a single bare bulb. Leo leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. A dark stain was spreading across the shoulder of his black shirt. "You're shot," Clementine said, the words a terrified whisper. "Just a scratch," he ground out, but the pale sheen on his face told a different story. "Keep moving. This tunnel leads to the boathouse. Go." "We're not leaving you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The actress was gone. This was Clementine. "Clementine," he said, and this time, the use of her real name was not a command, but a plea. "I am a dead man walking, with or without this bullet. I have failed my mission and betrayed my creditor. She will hunt me to the ends of the earth. Your only chance is to run." "My father's key," she said, holding up the data strip. "It's not just a kill switch, is it? It's proof. For you, too. A way out." He looked at the thin piece of vinyl in her hand, then back at her face. In the dim light, the war in his eyes was finally over. He looked exhausted, free, and utterly terrifyingly lost. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Run." From the other side of the door, they could hear the sound of power tools. A drill. Julian pounded on the steel. "Clem, we have to go. Now!" Clementine looked from the door to the wounded man bleeding out in front of her. She made a choice. She took Leo's good arm, slinging it over her shoulder. "You helped me," she said, her jaw set. "Now I'm helping you. Lean on me." He was dead weight, but she held him up. They stumbled down the corridor, a strange, desperate trio of a wounded spy, a betrayed daughter, and a secret that could burn the world down. The tunnel ended at a small, dark boathouse. The salty smell of the ocean was overwhelming. A sleek black speedboat was moored to the dock, engine idling. Micah was at the controls. He gave Leo a quick, assessing glance, then nodded at Clementine. He knew. He'd always known. They pushed off just as the boathouse door burst open. Valentina stood there, a silhouette of pure fury, her guards fanning out behind her. She raised her pistol, but the boat was already accelerating, roaring out into the dark, churning water of the Pacific. The coastline lights of Malibu faded into the distance. Julian wrapped a makeshift tourniquet around Leo's arm, the operative grunting in pain but not making a sound. Clementine sat, the cool spray on her face, the data strip a cold, hard certainty in her pocket. She looked at Leo, his head lolling back against the seat, his face etched with pain. His eyes were closed. She had the key. She had her brother. But she had lost the name, the lie, the ghost of a man she had almost let herself fall for. And in the darkness, speeding toward an unknown horizon, she wasn't sure if she had just escaped a prison or simply exchanged one cell for another. The quietest part of her soul, the part her father had spoken of, was no longer singing. It was screaming. The screaming in her soul subsided, replaced by the rhythmic throb of the boat's engine. It was a new, terrifying lullaby. She watched Leo's chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. He hadn't spoken since the boathouse, hadn't opened his eyes. He was a problem, a liability, a piece of evidence that could get them all killed. And yet, she had brought him aboard. They rendezvoused with a battered fishing trawler 20 miles offshore, a transaction executed in the blackness with the efficiency of criminals. Micah and Leo vanished below deck with a grim-faced medic who looked like he'd patched up bullet holes for breakfast. Clementine and Julian were left on the rain-slicked deck, the vast, indifferent ocean stretching around them. "This is insane," Julian said, finally breaking the silence. He had a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, but the tremor in his hands wasn't from the cold. "We're pirates, Clem. We're international fugitives. My last story was about insider trading at a soybean company. I am woefully unprepared for this." "He knew," Clementine said, her gaze on the churning black water. "Leo. He knew the record was a decoy. He sent me in there, but he also pointed me toward the real answer. He saved my life. He also held you prisoner and lied about everything," Julian countered, but without heat. "He was just stating a fact." "He's a weapon, Julian," she said, a new understanding dawning. And Serafina was the one holding it. He wasn't her partner. He was her tool. And he just broke. They sailed through the night and into the next day, a ghost ship adrift on the Pacific. The medic, a laconic man named Hector, emerged once to give them an update. "The bullet missed the artery. No major organ damage. He'll live, but he'll need a real hospital soon. A very quiet one." In the cramped cabin she shared with her brother, surrounded by the smell of diesel and damp wool, Clementine pulled out the vinyl data strip. Her father's legacy. A weapon. A shield. A curse. She ran her thumb over its smooth, cool surface. The quietest parts sing the loudest. She finally understood. The song was the proof. The silence was the choice of what to do with it. On the third day, they steered into a protected cove on a remote, unnamed island off the coast of Baja. A cluster of ramshackle buildings huddled near the shore, connected by sandy paths. It was a safe house, Micah explained. One of their fathers. A place off all maps. Leo was carried to a small, whitewashed bungalow. When Clementine brought him a glass of water, he was awake, propped up against a pile of pillows, his face pale and sheened with sweat. His good arm rested on the blanket, an IV line snaking from the back of his hand. "You shouldn't have done it," he said, his voice a rough whisper. "Saved your life?" "Yeah, well, don't get used to it," she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. She was angry at him, at herself, at the whole mess. "You don't understand," he continued, ignoring her jibe. His eyes, clear and focused, held a depth of exhaustion she hadn't seen before. "She's not just a broker, she's a spider. Everything connects to her. Governments, cartels, tech giants. This strip." He flicked his gaze to the bedside table where she'd placed the data strip. "It's not just a record of her sins. It's a map of her network. Everyone is on it, including people you work for. People who smile for cameras on red carpets." The implication settled in the quiet room, heavy and cold. The world she knew wasn't just a stage, it was the spider's web. And she had just stolen the map. "What do we do?" she asked, the question feeling both huge and useless. "You do nothing," he said, closing his eyes. "You give it to me. I have contacts, ghosts, people who can use this without it getting you killed. I'm done letting other people handle my life," she said, her voice low but firm. "My father trusted me with this, even if I didn't know it." A flicker of something, admiration perhaps, crossed Leo's face before being extinguished by pain. Sentimental fool, he murmured, echoing his earlier words, but this time without the bite. Over the next week, an uneasy truce settled in. The island was a strange limbo. Julian paced the beach, muttering into a satellite phone, trying to leverage their new terrifying asset into some kind of future that didn't involve a shallow grave. Micah was a shadow, forever scouting, forever watching the horizon for a threat that could come from anywhere. Clementine found herself drawn to Leo's bungalow. They didn't talk about secrets or networks. He told her about the snow in Siberia. She told him about learning to cry on cue. They were two people trading stories from lives that no longer existed, two ghosts finding a strange temporary solace in the shared space of their lies. She would change his bandages, her fingers careful on the heat of his skin, and neither of them would mention the tremor in her hand or the way he held his breath when she was near. The betrayal was still a raw, gaping wound between them, but in the sterile, salt-tinged air of the safe house, something else was beginning to grow, a fragile, dangerous sprout in the ruins. The reprieve ended on a Wednesday. The sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue, was suddenly sliced by the high-altitude contrail of a jet. Not a commercial airliner, a private jet, heading their way. Company, Micah's voice crackled over the handheld radio. Fast. Professional. Get the package. He meant Leo. Or the data strip, or both. Panic, cold and familiar, seized her. Julian ran in from the beach, his face grim. They found us. How in God's name did they find us? There was no time for an answer. The sound of rotor blades joined the whine of the jet's engines. A helicopter, matte black and military issue, was sweeping in over the water. It's not her, Leo said, struggling to sit up. He pointed to a small window. That's a U.S. Marshals transport jet. The bird is DEA. This is official. That was almost more terrifying. The government. The spider's other legs. Take the strip and go, Leo said, his breath coming in ragged pants. He reached under his mattress, pulling out a small metallic object, a distress beacon. This will get you to a contact, a name. Marcus Thorne. He's an information broker in Geneva. The only one I can think of who might know how to play this. He owes me a life. I'm not leaving you, she said, the words out before she could stop them. This is not a movie, Clementine, he snapped, his voice cracking with urgency. This is the endgame. You cannot win a firefight. You cannot outrun a federal task force. Your only weapon is information. Use it. Go. He pressed the beacon into her hand. Give him the strip. Tell him Petrov sent you. Tell him the debt is paid. A crash from the main hut, shouts. The assault had begun. Julian grabbed her arm. He's right, Clem. We have to move. She looked at Leo, at the pale, determined set of his jaw. He had chosen this. To stay, to fight, to give her a head start. A final, brutal act of penance. She leaned down, her lips brushing his cheek. It wasn't a kiss. It was a promise, a farewell. Goodbye, Leo, she whispered. And for the first time, she used the name not as an accusation, but as a memory. He flinched, then closed his eyes. Go. She and Julian scrambled out the back of the bungalow, into the dense, scraggly foliage that covered the island's interior. The sounds of the battle receded behind them, replaced by the frantic thumping of their own hearts. The beacon in her hand was warm, a single point of focus in the chaos. She didn't look back. The beacon led them to a hidden cove on the island's far side, where a small, utilitarian submarine was surfaced, its hatch open like a silent, waiting mouth. A lone figure stood on the conning tower, a woman with her hair in a severe, practical knot. She held a rifle, but her expression was one of bored efficiency. "Thorn's extraction?" she asked, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. Clementine could only nod. "Get in. We have a 10-minute window before the satellite comes back around." The descent was a silent, suffocating journey into the deep. The only light was the dim, red glow of the instrument panel. They didn't speak. They were no longer fugitives, they were assets being transported. A new kind of prison. They surfaced in the dead of night, in a cold, murky European river that smelled of centuries of secrets. The woman, whose name they learned was Anya, guided them through a labyrinth of damp, cobblestoned alleys to an unmarked door. She knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door opened. Marcus Thorne was not what she expected. He was not a sleek, suited spy master. He was a small, rotund man with a rumpled tweed jacket and a face like a worried bloodhound. He blinked at them over a pair of half-moon spectacles. "Petrov," he said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "He's alive, then." "Good. He owes me a car." He peered at Clementine. "And you're the daughter. The actress. You look smaller in person." Julian stepped forward. "We have something for you. Something he said you'd want." Thorne led them into a room that was a glorious, organized mess. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves sagged under the weight of ancient tomes and modern tech manuals. Monitors displayed streams of data in a dozen languages. It smelled of old paper, stale coffee, and ozone. The heart of a different kind of spider. Clementine placed the vinyl data strip on his cluttered desk. "My father left this." Thorne picked it up with a pair of tweezers, holding it up to the light like a jeweler examining a flawed gem. He let out a low whistle. "Maxwell DeWitt. Clever, clever man. The microgroove. A dead man's switch for the analog age." He turned to a complex-looking terminal. "This will take some time, and it will be very, very loud." He was right. As he began to extract the data, names began to flash across the monitors. Senators, CEOs, generals, crime lords. Valentina Cortez's network laid bare. It was a roster of the powerful, interconnected by threads of blackmail and graft. And then, a name appeared that made the room feel suddenly, unnervingly cold. It was Leo's. Not Petrov, the Spetsnaz ghost, but Leo, the man who had made her tea and watched her sleep. Beside it was a designation, asset compromised. He wasn't her creditor. Clementine breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He was her prize, a defector she was trying to reclaim. That's why the mission was so important. Thorne grunted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Serafina doesn't just collect information. She collects people, breaks them, remakes them. Your friend there was her masterpiece. A ghost she thought she owned." The data stream continued, a river of damning information. And then, at the very end, one final entry. Not a name. An address. A bank account in Geneva, and a single cryptic note. For Clementine. The performance. Julian stared at it. It's a trust fund. A dead drop. But what does the performance mean? Clementine knew. It wasn't about acting. It was about what she did next. The world was watching. She could release the data, burn it all down, and probably be assassinated within a week. Or she could use it, play a part, perform. Thorn, she said, her voice hard as steel. I need you to do something for me. The next morning was a blur. Anya, the stoic submarine pilot, became their unlikely stylist, producing a series of impeccably tailored, unremarkable suits for them both. They were no longer fugitives, they were business. They flew from Geneva to London on a private jet, the vinyl strip locked in a diplomatic pouch in Julian's briefcase. Their destination was a television studio, the most watched morning news program in the United Kingdom. She was booked as a guest, her people having circulated a story that she was taking her career in a new direction, with a groundbreaking interview about her recent ordeal. The media had fallen for it, hungry for the sensational. Backstage, the air was a familiar cocktail of panic and hairspray. A harried producer tried to pin a microphone on her. Just a light chat about the experience, Ms. DeWitt, she chirped. Empowering, overcoming trauma. The viewers loved that. Clementine just smiled. The actress was here. She walked onto the bright, blinding stage, the lights hot on her skin, the studio audience a sea of expectant faces. The host, a suave man named Alistair Finch, greeted her with practiced, sympathetic concern. Clementine, he began. It's a pleasure to have you. After the horrific events of the past few weeks, the world is rooting for you. Can you tell us? How are you finding the strength to go on? Clementine looked past the camera, past the bright lights, and spoke to the lens itself, to the people pulling the strings, to Serafina. The strength came from a realization. Alistair, she said, her voice calm, clear, and resonant. She wasn't the frightened girl from the balcony. She was her father's daughter. I realized I wasn't the victim of a crazed fan. I was the target of a corporate crime, a hostile takeover of a sort. Alistair's smile faltered. The producer in his earpiece was probably screaming. I'm not sure I follow. My father, Maxwell DeWitt, built a system to protect people from people like Valentina Cortez, she said, dropping the name like a bomb in the placid studio. She has spent the last decade trying to acquire it. And me. She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. The quietest parts sing the loudest, Valentina. And my father's song is about to be broadcast globally. She turned to the large screen behind her. Julian, if you please. On the screen behind her, a new image appeared. Not a chart, but the cover of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Then the image dissolved into a scrolling list of names, accounts, transactions, evidence. The raw, unedited data from the vinyl strip, courtesy of a very fast, very nervous Marcus Thorne. It was a data dump, live on television. The studio erupted. Alistair Finch was on his feet, sputtering. Security was rushing the stage. Clementine didn't move. She just looked into the camera, a final, silent message for the one person who might still be watching. The performance is over. Then she turned, and with Anya clearing a path, she and Julian walked off the stage, out of the chaos and into a waiting car. They didn't go to the airport. They drove to a quiet, nondescript office building and entered a room that looked remarkably like Marcus Thorne's. He was there, along with Anya and half a dozen other grim-faced individuals. They watched on a wall of monitors as the world caught fire. Financial markets convulsed. Governments issued frantic denials. And in Malibu, a SWAT team stormed a beautiful house on a cliff, finding it empty, cleaned out, as if its owner had simply vanished into thin air. "She's gone," Anya reported, hanging up a secure phone. "Disappeared, like a ghost." "She won't stay gone," Clementine said, her eyes on a map of the world pinned to the wall. "We've burned her web, but not the spider. She'll be looking for me. For this." She tapped the briefcase that held the original vinyl strip. A copy was now forever in the public domain. But the original was a talisman, a symbol. "So what's the play?" Julian asked, looking at her. He wasn't asking as her brother anymore. He was asking as her chief of staff. "We don't hide," Clementine said, her gaze sweeping over the room, over her new unlikely team. "She came after me in my world. Now we go after her in hers. The quietest parts sing the loudest." She pointed to a location on the map, a city in the middle of a desert, a place known for mirages and fortunes built on nothing. "Dubai," she said. "It's where she launders her money, where she rebuilds. We're going to go find out what she's singing next." The air in Dubai was a hot, dry breath, tasting of dust and money, from the penthouse suite of the Burj Al Arab. The city spread out below them, a shimmering, impossible mirage of glass and steel rising from the sand. It was a place built on ambition, a perfect mirror for the game they were now playing. Their cover was elegant in its simplicity. Clementine DeWitt, the reclusive billionaire's daughter turned activist philanthropist, was in town to establish a charitable foundation dedicated to ethical governance. A direct, provocative jab at the city's foundation. Julian, ever the opportunist, was the foundation's director, a whirlwind of meetings with PR firms and legal teams. Anya was their head of security, a silent, watchful presence. And Marcus Thorne, from his cluttered command post in Geneva, was their eye in the sky, feeding them a constant stream of data on the city's financial underbelly. Clementine stood on the balcony, the evening breeze a welcome relief. The city lights blurred, a river of jewels. She wore a simple, cream-colored silk dress, a stark contrast to the armored person she had become. In her hand, she held a small, sleek tablet, displaying the day's threat matrix of the list of shell corporations, front companies, and known associates of Serafina's network that had surfaced in Dubai since the data dump. One name kept appearing: Al Jamil Construction, a company that specialized in building luxury resorts on artificial islands. A company that had just been awarded the contract for a new, highly publicized maritime museum. A project being personally overseen by a visiting dignitary. "She's not just hiding," Clementine murmured, tracing the company's logo on the tablet. "She's rebuilding, using a public project to move money, to reestablish her connections, to be seen, or to be lured." Anya's voice cut through the quiet from the doorway of the suite. She held out a phone. "Thorne. He says it's urgent." Clementine took the phone. "Marcus." "I have it," he said, his breathless with excitement and a hint of fear. "The reason for Al Jamil. The museum isn't the target. It's the delivery system." "Delivery for what?" Clementine asked, her grip tightening on the phone. "A new piece of technology, a quantum communications device. Untraceable, unhackable. The kind of thing that lets a spider build a whole new, invisible web. It's being shipped in as a core exhibit for the museum's main hall. The delivery is tomorrow night, at the gala." The line went dead. The tablet in her other hand felt impossibly heavy. They had a location, a timeline, a weapon poised to be handed back to the enemy. The gala was a symphony of opulence. The museum, still empty of exhibits, was a cavern of white marble and dramatic lighting, filled with Dubai's elite international investors and a swarm of press. Clementine moved through the crowd, a vision in sapphire blue, her smile a perfect, practiced curve. She played her part, the gracious philanthropist, networking, charming, her eyes scanning, cataloging. Julian was a step behind her, a tablet disguised as a menu in his hands, cross-referencing faces with Thorne's data. Anya was a ghost, blending into the walls, her position covering every exit. Clementine found herself near the main hall, where a large object stood shrouded by a white velvet cloth. Two stern-faced security guards in al-Jamil uniforms flanked it. The exhibit. The delivery. She was chatting with a portly sheikh about sustainable development when she felt a familiar, unnerving tingle at the back of her neck. The feeling of being watched, not by a predator, but by a kindred spirit. She scanned the crowd, her gaze lingering on the waitstaff, the security, the faces half hidden by champagne flutes. And then she saw him. He was a waiter, carrying a tray of empty glasses, but he moved with the contained, liquid grace she knew better than her own heartbeat. He was thinner than she remembered, a dark stubble shadowing his jaw, but it was him. Leo. Their eyes met across the crowded room. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her. It wasn't relief. It was terror. He was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to be gone. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning, before disappearing behind a curtain into the service corridors. Her composure was a fragile glass pane, cracked but holding. She excused herself from the shake, her smile never wavering, and made her way toward the restrooms, her path taking her past the curtained doorway Leo had used. As she passed, a hand shot out, strong and fast, pulling her into the darkness. She was in a narrow service hallway, her back pressed against the cool concrete wall. Leo's body was a cage around her, his forearm braced above her head. He smelled of bleach and faintly of his own familiar warm scent. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice a furious, panicked hiss. "Are you insane?" "Seraphina's not here," he said, ignoring her question, his voice a low, urgent rumble. His eyes were dark, intense, scanning the empty corridor. "This is a feint. The device in there is a decoy, loaded with a tracker. She knew you'd come. She knew I'd follow you." "Follow me." The words were a betrayal on her tongue. "How?" "The beacon," he said, a flicker of something like regret in his eyes. "The one I gave you. It sends two signals. One to your contact, one to me. I had to know you were safe." A new wave of fury washed over her, hot and cold. "You used me. Again." "I protected you. Again," he corrected, his tone grim. "The real device is being delivered an hour from now. At the old port, a container ship. The Sea Serpent." A door opened down the hall, the chatter of the gala spilling in. Leo tensed, pressing closer, shielding her with his body. For a breathless second, they were just two people hiding in the dark, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. "Meet me there," he breathed, his lips so close to her ear she could feel the heat of them. Alley beside Pier 7. Alone. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows as if he'd never been there. leaving her with the phantom pressure of his body and a new, impossible choice. Trust the spy who had lied to her, or trust her own instincts? She walked back into the party, the bright lights a painful assault. She found Julian by the ice sculpture, a frantic look on his face. "He's here," she said, her voice low and steady. "Leo. He says this is a trap. The device is a decoy." Julian's face hardened. "And you believe him? After everything?" "He knew about the beacon, Julian. He's been tracking us. And he gave us a new target, the sea serpent, at the old port. In 1 hour." Thorne's voice crackled in her earpiece, which she'd worn as a piece of discreet jewelry. "He's telling the truth," the broker said, his tone grim. "Satellite just picked up a heat signature on that ship matching the device's energy profile. Al-Jamil's men are converging on the port. This isn't a feint, it's a two-pronged attack. She's expecting you to run to the port." "So the gala is a trap," Clementine realized aloud. "No," Anya's cool voice interjected. "The gala is the diversion. You are the target for the port. The gala is where she's going to hit you while you're gone. It's a classic pincer." Clementine's mind raced. A trap within a trap. Leo had warned her about the decoy, but he was still a part of the game, a piece on a board she couldn't fully see. Was he sending her into the real trap, or saving her from a different one? The only certainty was that she couldn't be in two places at once. "You can't go," Julian said, his voice pleading. "It's a suicide run. We have to abort, get out of Dubai." "And let her get the device? Start all over again?" Clementine shook her head, cold, hard resolve settling over her. "My father didn't raise me to run from bad reviews." She turned to Anya. "Take a team to the port. Create a diversion. Loud, messy, but stay clear of the container. Your job is to draw out her forces, not secure the package. Be seen." Anya gave a curt, efficient nod. "Understood." "And you?" Julian asked, a dawning horror on his face. "I have to make an appearance," Clementine said, her gaze sweeping across the opulent room, her eyes landing on the shrouded exhibit in the main hall. "I'm going to give our host the performance she paid for." She glided back into the heart of the party, a predator moving through a flock of birds. She snagged a glass of champagne from a passing tray and made her way toward the main exhibit, her path deliberately conspicuous. She felt the eyes on her, the silent shift in the room's energy. The trap was springing. She stopped in front of the velvet-draped decoy. The guards watched her, their hands resting near their weapons. She smiled at them, a dazzling, disarming smile, and took a slow sip of champagne. "Fascinating piece, isn't it?" she said to no one in particular, her voice carrying. "I've heard it's quite explosive." A ripple of uneasy laughter went through the nearby guests. But the guards didn't laugh. They tensed. She had their attention, and someone else's. The lights in the main hall suddenly dimmed. A single bright spotlight clicked on, illuminating the shrouded exhibit, and from the shadows at the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. She was dressed in a flowing emerald-green gown that seemed to drink the light, her dark hair coiled in an intricate serpentine knot. Valentina Cortez. She was more beautiful and more terrifying than the photograph on the data strip. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was here to collect her prize. "Mince DeWitt," Valentina's voice purred from the speakers, smooth as venom. "What a pleasure. You have something of mine." The guards beside the exhibit moved, not toward Clementine, but to flank Valentina, revealing their true allegiance. Guests began to back away, a wave of panic rippling through the crowd. This was no longer a party. It was an ambush. "The device?" Clementine asked, holding her ground. "You'll have to do better than that oversized paperweight." Valentina laughed, a low, musical sound. "Oh, my dear, I'm not here for the decoy. I'm here for you." She gestured, and two more of her men appeared, blocking the main exits. "You see, you are the real key. Your father didn't just entrust you with a weapon. He entrusted you with a conscience. A very inconvenient, very human flaw. But flaws can be corrected." From his position across the room, hidden behind a marble pillar, Julian watched in horror. He keyed his comm. "Clem, get out of there. The teams are in position at the port. The diversion is working." But Clementine didn't move. She stood locked in Valentina's predatory gaze. This was the performance she had promised. Not on a global stage, but in a cage of marble and mirrors. She had to hold the spider's attention, while Anya dismantled her web. "My father also taught me that the best way to disarm a bomb is to cut the red wire," Clementine said, her voice dangerously calm. "So the question is, Valentina, are you the red wire or the blue one?" Valentina's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of cold fury. She raised a hand. "Enough of this. Take her." The guards lunged, but they weren't the only ones moving. From a service door near the exhibit, a figure exploded into the room with terrifying speed. Not a waiter, not a guard. It was Leo. He moved with a brutal, fluid grace, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He disarmed the first guard with a sharp twist, the man's arm breaking with a sickening crack. He used the fallen guard's body as a shield, firing a single, silenced shot that dropped the second man. He wasn't there to save her. He was there to create chaos. In the split second of confusion, Clementine acted. She threw her champagne flute at the main exhibit spotlight, shattering the bulb and plunging that section of the hall into darkness. Guests screamed, scrambling for the exits in a panicked tide. "Find them!" Valentina shrieked from her secured position, her face a mask of fury. In the ensuing darkness, Clementine ran, not toward an exit, but toward the curtained doorway Leo had used. He was there, a shadow in the chaos, grabbing her arm and pulling her along. "This way," he yelled, pulling her through the labyrinth of service corridors, away from the gala, away from Anya's teams, away from the port. The plan changed. They burst out of a side door into the humid Dubai night. A motorcycle, black and sleek, was waiting, its engine already roaring. "Where are we going?" Clementine shouted over the engine as she swung onto the back behind him, her hands instinctively gripping his waist. "She's not after the device," Leo yelled back, gunning the engine and peeling out into the sparse traffic. "The device was a lure to get me. And you." The motorcycle sped through the city, a dark streak against the glittering skyline. They left the opulence of the new city behind, heading toward the sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of the old souk. The air grew thick with the smells of spices, charcoal, and stale water. Leo skidded to a halt in a deserted alley, the narrow walls echoing the engine's sudden silence. He was off the bike in a flash, pulling her with him into the deep shadows. "She knows you're the only one who can fully decode the original strip," he said, his words coming in a rush. The public dump was gibberish to her. She needs the key that's in your head, the context, the memories your father shared with you. "Then why the device at the port?" Clementine demanded, her mind reeling. "A two-pronged trap, but not the one we thought. The port was a legitimate operation for her. Her real team is securing the device as we speak. The gala was to draw me out, and it worked. So what was the point of all this? She gestured wildly, encompassing the alley, the bite, their escape. Why warn me? Why save me? Leo's face was cast in shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Because you and I are the only ones who know what she's truly after now. The device is a weapon, but you're a blueprint, her original blueprint, corrupted by your father's sentiment. She wants to erase her failure. She wants to break the last piece of him that she couldn't control, me. The realization was a physical blow. Valentina wasn't just a rival. She was a creator. And Leo was her runaway creation. We have to get to the port, Clementine said, a new fierce resolve hardening her voice. We can't let Anya's team walk into a trap. They think they're creating a diversion. They're the targets. They're already there, Leo said grimly. We can't stop that. But we can finish it. We have to get to the sea serpent before her team does. Before Anya's team is wiped out. He led her deeper into the souk, a phantom moving through a sea of noise and color. He procured a battered pickup truck, its engine coughing to life with a reluctant groan. They drove in silence, the city's glitter a distant, mocking galaxy. The old port was a world away from the gleaming towers of Dubai, a sprawling maze of rusting cranes, stacked containers, and the acrid tang of diesel and salt. It was a graveyard of ships and secrets. Leo killed the engine 100 yards from Pier 7. The sea serpent is at the end. There's a secondary access point through the container yard, less guarded. They moved on foot, a ghostly pair navigating the metallic canyons. The night was alive with the groans of metal and the distant creak of ships. Then, a new sound. The sharp, percussive crack of gunfire. Anya's team had made contact. They broke into a run, pounding across the oil-stained ground. They reached the Sea Serpent, a hulking, dilapidated cargo ship that looked like it should have been scrapped a decade ago. A rope ladder hung down the hull, swaying gently. "After you," Leo said, his pistol drawn, covering their six. Clementine scrambled up the ladder, the rough fibers biting into her hands. She dropped onto the deck, a landscape of rust and shadows. The gunfire was louder now, coming from the port side of the ship, where the container that held the device was being unloaded. Anya's team was pinned down, outgunned, trapped between the container and the ship's superstructure. Clementine saw her, a flash of tactical gear and blonde hair, returning fire from behind a stack of crates. 2 of her team were already down. "They're going to be overrun," Clementine whispered in horror. "The device is the priority," Leo said, his voice a cold, hard command. He pointed to the main deck house. "The control room. If we can access the ship's systems, we can lock the crew out. Maybe even trigger the fire suppression. Buy us some time." They ran, hugging the shadows of the deck. They reached the deck house, a steel box clinging to the ship's back. The door was locked. Leo didn't hesitate. He aimed his pistol at the lock and fired, the shot a muffled boom in the night. He kicked the door open, and they were inside. The control room was a vintage tomb of analog dials and flickering green screens. A single crewman was at the helm, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He spun around, his eyes wide with surprise. Leo moved before the man could even register the threat. A single, precise strike that sent him crumpling to the floor. "We have control," Leo said, his hands flying over the console, activating the internal comms system. "Anya," he barked into the microphone, "disengage. Fall back to the east cargo bay. Now." A reply came back, distorted by gunfire and static. Negative. We're pinned. They've got heavy weapons. Clementine looked at the main monitor, which displayed a schematic of the ship. She saw Anya's position, a cluster of blue dots surrounded by a swarm of red. She also saw a blinking red icon in the very center of the schematic. The engine room. The engine room, she said, her mind working, connecting the dots. If we overheat the engines, we can create a diversion. A small explosion. Something to draw their fire. You'll cripple the ship, Leo said. But he was already moving, his fingers dancing over the controls, rerouting power, bypassing safety protocols. We're not planning on sailing it, she replied. On the screen, she watched the temperature gauge for the main boiler climb into the red. An explosion rocked the port side, not the one they had planned, but the sound of a grenade launcher. One of Anya's remaining team went down. It was now just her, pinned, with no avenue of escape. I'm going out there, Clementine said, her decision made in a heartbeat. No, Leo said, grabbing her arm. It's suicide. You create the diversion, she said, pulling free. I'll get her. I owe her that much. She didn't give him a chance to argue. She slipped out of the control room and ran back into the chaos. She moved with a new purpose, not as an asset, but as a soldier. She grabbed a discarded flare gun from a locker near the door. She didn't know how to use a real pistol, but this she understood. Theater. Distraction. She crept along the deck, using the shadows of the containers as cover. She could hear the shouted commands of Serafina's men, their accents a mix of Russian and Arabic. They were systematically closing in on Anya. Clementine found a position, with a clear line of sight, to the main firefight. She loaded the flare gun, her hands surprisingly steady. Then she aimed not at the men, but at a stack of oil drums near the stern. She pulled the trigger. The flare shot across the deck, a brilliant red comet that slammed into the drums. They didn't explode, but they erupted in a towering column of black, acrid smoke, instantly obscuring the area in a choking fog. Now, she heard Leo's voice yell through the ship's speakers. At that exact moment, a deep, groaning shudder ran through the hull, followed by the deafening shriek of metal. The boiler. The diversion. In the confusion, with smoke billowing and the deck lurching beneath them, Clementine sprinted the last 20 yards to Anya's position. This way, she yelled, grabbing the other woman's arm. Anya, her face blackened with soot, gave her a look of grim surprise but didn't hesitate. They ran, not toward the east cargo bay, but toward the railing Leo had pointed out earlier, away from the firefight. They reached the railing just as Serafina's men, disoriented by the smoke and noise, realized their quarry was gone. Bullets sparked against the steel railing beside them. Jump! Leo's voice commanded over the comms. Clementine didn't look. She just jumped, plunging the 10 feet into the dark, greasy water of the harbor. The shock of the cold, oily water stole her breath. She kicked upward, breaking the surface, sputtering. Anya surfaced beside her. A speedboat, black and silent, slid out from behind the hull of a neighboring trawler. Leo was at the helm. They hauled themselves aboard, the boat speeding away into the labyrinth of the harbor before the alarm could be fully raised. They had failed to secure the device. They had lost men, but they had survived. They didn't go back to the hotel. They didn't go to the airport. Leo drove them to a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of the city, a safe house that was off even Thorne's grid. It was Spartan, clean, and anonymous, a place to disappear. "We lost," Julian said, his voice hollow. He was pacing the small living room, the shock of the evening settling in. "She has the device. We have nothing." "We have this," Clementine said, placing the original vinyl strip on the cheap laminate table. It was the only thing they had managed to bring with them, and we have us. Leo stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling city lights, a bandage on his arm from a piece of shrapnel. "She has the device, but she knows we're still in play. She knows I'm not just her asset anymore, and she knows you're not just a target." He turned from the window, his gaze landing on Clementine. "She'll be coming for us, all of us, and she won't make the same mistake twice." The apartment felt less like a safe house and more like a holding cell. They were wounded, exposed, and the enemy had the ultimate weapon. But as Clementine looked at her brother, at the hardened resolve in Anya's face, and at the conflicted, haunted man by the window, she felt not despair, but a strange, fierce calm. The performance was over. The war had just begun. She picked up the vinyl strip, its smooth, cool surface a familiar weight in her palm. The song wasn't over. They had just reached the bridge. Weeks bled into a month. The Dubai apartment became their bunker, a nerve center for a war of whispers and data. The world moved on, the scandal from the London broadcast fading into the next cycle of news. Valentina Cortez was officially a ghost, her assets frozen, her name a rumor in dark web forums. But they knew better. The spider was simply waiting for the dust to settle. Marcus Thorne from his Geneva fortress was their only contact with the outside world. He fed them intelligence, scrubbed their digital footprints, and funneled them untraceable funds. He was their quartermaster. "Nothing," he said over the encrypted line, his voice a tired rasp. "The device is offline, completely dark. It's like it vanished. And I'm tracking Serafina's known financials. They're dormant. She's either broken hiding, or she's found a new, untraceable way to move." "Or she's planning something," Clementine countered, studying a map of the world that dominated one wall of the living room. She had spent hours staring at it, trying to think like her enemy. The device isn't for finance, not directly. It's for communication. Untraceable, unhackable. It's a tool for an army of ghosts. She has to use it eventually, Anya added, cleaning her sidearm with mechanical precision. A weapon that sits in a box is just an expensive paperweight. But the waiting was its own form of torture. The silence was a heavy blanket smothering. Leo grew more restless, his pacing a constant rhythm in the small apartment. He and Clementine existed in a state of brittle, unspoken truce. He would teach her self-defense in the cramped living room, their bodies a study in controlled tension, his hands correcting her stance, her breath catching at the contact. He was her protector, her liability, and the one person in the room who truly understood the depth of the monster they were hunting. One evening, as Julian was trying to trace a dormant server linked to a Cortez shell corporation, he stopped. "Wait a minute. I've got something. A signal. It's faint, almost buried in the background radiation of the southern hemisphere. It's not a transmission. It's a ping." "On what?" Clementine asked, moving to look over his shoulder. "A listening station. A decommissioned research outpost. On an island in the South Atlantic. Bouvet Island." Leo was instantly alert. That's Norwegian territory. It's one of the most isolated places on Earth. Exactly, Julian said, zooming in on a satellite image. A single, lonely speck of volcanic rock, covered in a glacier. No one goes there, except, according to this, a team of geological surveyors that landed 2 weeks ago. A private charter, out of Cape Town. That's her, Leo said, the certainty in his voice chilling. She's not hiding. She's building her new web from the one place in the world no one is looking. The device isn't for talking to the world. It's for talking to ghosts, without anyone else ever hearing. The plan took shape with brutal efficiency. They couldn't assault the island. It was a fortress of ice and isolation, and any approach would be seen from 1,000 miles away. They had to get in quietly. I have a way, Leo said after a long silence. He pulled up a file on a secure drive. A Russian submarine, an Akula class. It's slated for decommissioning, moored in a naval yard near Murmansk. My last official mission was to oversee the scrapping of its non-essential systems. He paused, a shadow crossing his face. I didn't. He had left a back door, a single isolated system that he alone could access, a ghost in the machine. It's our way in, he concluded. A covert insertion. No one will know a submarine that's officially in a scrapyard is moving through the Atlantic. The journey was a descent into a different kind of hell. The rented trawler that took them to the frigid waters of the Barents Sea was a nightmare of pitching decks and freezing spray. The transfer to the submarine, conducted in the dead of night under a canopy of stars, was a cold, silent ballet of shadows and steel. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of diesel, ozone, and recycled breath. The Akula was a steel tomb, its skeleton crew of hardened Russian sailors loyal only to Leo's final standing orders. Days bled into one another in the red-lit, claustrophobic corridors. Clementine found a strange camaraderie in the silence. She was no longer an actress or a billionaire's daughter. She was a soldier on a mission. She and Leo would stand on the cramped conning tower as the submarine surfaced in the frigid darkness, watching the icebergs drift past like silent, Leviathan ghosts. He taught her to read the sonar, to identify the specific acoustic signature of ice cracking, of water moving. They shared their rations, their hands brushing, the small contact a stark reminder of the fragile, dangerous humanity that bound them. The submarine surfaced a mile off the coast of Bouvet Island. The view from the periscope was a vision of apocalypse, a sheer cliff of black rock, swept by a glacier that calved directly into the sea. A permanent, roiling cloud of steam hung over the shore where the lava met the ice. There was no beach, no harbor, only a jagged, hostile shore. The listening station is here, Leo said, pointing to a thermal overlay on the monitor, built into the side of the volcano. There's a service entrance, a subterranean tunnel that leads up from the water, used for automated maintenance probes. The insertion team was small. Leo, Clementine, and Anya. Julian would remain on the submarine, their eye in the sky, their link to the world. Dressed in white, insulated Arctic gear, they looked like specters. They entered the black, icy water through the submarine's escape hatch, the cold a shocking, violent invasion. The underwater tunnel was a nightmare. The water was a freezing black void, their headlamps weak, feeble specks in the absolute darkness. The tunnel was a concrete pipe, slick with algae, the current pulling and pushing at them. Clementine's breath froze in her regulator, her movements slow and clumsy in the thick gloves. Leo moved ahead of her, a single, unwavering point of light in the oppressive dark. He was her anchor. They surfaced in a large, flooded chamber, the air thick with the smell of damp rock and machinery. Anya was already on the catwalk above, covering them. They climbed out, their gear dripping onto the grated floor. The silence was profound. A heavy, resonant hum, that seemed to emanate from the very rock around them. "This is it?" Leo whispered, checking a small digital readout that confirmed the location. The tunnel system was a maze, but he knew the way. He had studied the schematics. A ghost, haunting a ghost's house. They moved silently through the sterile concrete corridors. The base was a strange hybrid of cutting-edge technology and brutalist Soviet-era construction. The air was frigid, recycled. Every footstep echoed. They passed abandoned labs, equipment shrouded in plastic, a mausoleum of scientific ambition. Then, they heard it. Faintly at first, then growing louder. The sound of a woman's laughter. Rich, confident, utterly out of place. Valentina. They were getting close. They approached a heavy, reinforced steel door. Beyond it, they could see light. Leo placed a small, circular device on the door's keypad. A screen on the device flickered, cycling through combinations. A soft chirp, and the door clicked open. They slipped inside. They were in a wide, high-ceilinged control room. The walls were lined with monitors, but they were all dark. In the center of the room was a single, illuminated workstation, and at that workstation sat Valentina Cortez. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at a holographic display that shimmered in the air in front of her. A complex, three-dimensional map of connections. A new web. And in the center of it all, a single, glowing node. The quantum device. Its light a steady, malevolent pulse. She wasn't communicating with anyone. She was initializing it, seeding it, preparing to cast her net across the globe. She must have sensed them, or heard the infinitesimal change in the room's acoustics. She didn't turn around. She simply said, "I was wondering when you'd arrive, Petrov. Or should I say Leo? I have to admit, I'm disappointed. I expected you alone, not this. The whole tragic little family." She swiveled in her chair, a predator unhurried. Her smile was a razor's edge. "And you, Clementine, you look tired. All this running, all this fighting. For what? For your father's ghostly ideals? He was a brilliant man, but fatally sentimental. He built a key, but forgot to ask who would be worthy of turning it." "He trusted me," Clementine said, her voice a raw, cold thing in the sterile room. "And he trusted him." "Did he?" Valentina's gaze shifted to Leo, a look of profound, proprietary disappointment. Or did he simply recognize a broken tool when he saw one? A beautiful, deadly instrument that could be reforged. He sent him to you, hoping your sentimentality might be a balm. But a broken weapon is still a weapon, my dear, and all weapons belong to someone. "That's where you're wrong," Leo said, stepping forward, his pistol raised. "I belong to no one." Valentina laughed, a light, musical sound that did nothing to warm the room. "Oh, you poor boy. You really believe that? Every choice you've made, every life you've taken or saved, has been in reaction to me. You are a reflection of my will. You always will be." She raised a delicate, manicured hand and tapped a command on the console. "The system is now armed. One command, and I will trigger the device. It won't just broadcast. It will release a cascade logic bomb, an encrypted pulse that will corrupt every secure network on the planet. Financial, military, intelligence, all brought to their knees. Chaos. And from that chaos, a new order will rise. Mine." "It's a bluff," Anya said from her position near the door, her rifle steady. "You're not a suicide bomber. You want to rule the world, not end it. Rule, end. Such simplistic terms, Valentina purred. I prefer to think of it as a system reboot. But you're right. I don't want to die, which is why you're not going to shoot me. Because the dead man's switch is in my other hand, a simple pressure sensor. If my heart stops or my hand lets go, the pulse goes out instantly. So, here we are, a standoff. Who will blink first? Silence. The air crackled with unspent violence. Leo's aim was unwavering, but Clementine could see the calculation in his eyes. He knew her. He knew she wasn't bluffing. Clementine's gaze flickered from Valentina's triumphant face to the holographic display, the new web. But there was something wrong with it. Amidst the glowing nodes and connecting lines, there was a single, tiny, dark spot, an anomaly, a place where the light didn't reach. Her father's work. He hadn't just built a key, he had built a failsafe, a wormhole in the system. She thought of the vinyl strip, the data strip she still carried. Not just a list of names, a song, a frequency, her father's lullaby. The quietest parts sing the loudest. He built a ghost in your machine, Valentina, Clementine said, her voice suddenly calm, clear, cutting through the tension. A piece of code so deeply embedded, so fundamentally tied to the system's core, that you can't see it. But it's there, and it sings my father's song. Valentina's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Lies. I reverse-engineered every byte. The system is clean. He didn't hide it in the code, Clementine said, taking a slow step forward. He hid it in the hardware, in the very crystalline structure of the quantum processor, a resonance frequency, a song only I can conduct. She didn't have the device to trigger it, but she had the next best thing. She looked at Leo. Their eyes met. A silent conversation passed between them, in a heartbeat. A lifetime of lies and truths, of pain and a fragile, impossible connection. He knew what she was asking. He knew the cost. You can't do it, Leo said, his voice a low warning. But it was for her, not for Valentina. It's the only way, she replied, her gaze unwavering. With a snarl of pure rage, understanding dawning on her face, Valentina made her move. She didn't release the dead man's switch. She threw it at Clementine. A decoy. Her real move was her other hand, which produced a small, sleek pistol from beneath the console. She fired, not at Clementine, but at the holographic projector, showering the room in a shower of sparks and shattering the light. The room plunged into darkness, punctuated by the red glow of emergency lights and the strobing flashes of Anya's rifle as she returned fire. Chaos. In the dark, Clementine didn't run for cover. She ran toward the console, her movements guided by the afterimage burned into her retinas. She found the keyboard, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't trying to stop the device. She was trying to talk to it. He didn't hide it in the code, Clementine said, taking a slow step forward. He hid it in the hardware, in the very crystalline structure of the quantum processor, a resonance frequency, a song only I can conduct. She didn't have the device to trigger it, but she had the next best thing. She looked at Leo. Their eyes met. A silent conversation passed between them, in a heartbeat, a lifetime of lies and truths, of pain and a fragile, impossible connection. He knew what she was asking. He knew the cost. "You can't do it," Leo said, his voice a low warning. But it was for her, not for Valentina. "It's the only way," she replied, her gaze unwavering. With a snarl of pure rage, understanding dawning on her face, Valentina made her move. She didn't release the dead man's switch. She threw it at Clementine. A decoy. Her real move was her other hand, which produced a small, sleek pistol from beneath the console. She fired, not at Clementine, but at the holographic projector, showering the room in a shower of sparks and shattering the light. The room plunged into darkness, punctuated by the red glow of emergency lights and the strobing flashes of Anya's rifle as she returned fire. Chaos. In the dark, Clementine didn't run for cover. She ran toward the console, her movements guided by the after-image burned into her retinas. She found the keyboard, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't trying to stop the device. She was trying to talk to it. She keyed in a sequence, not a command, but a string of characters. A line from her father's favorite poem. A password she had thought was just a game between them. Roses have thorns, and silver fountains mud. On the main screen, amidst the chaos of the system-wide alert, a single line of text appeared. Authentication required. Musical key. This was it. Her father's ultimate performance. She couldn't sing it, but she could hum it. She leaned into the microphone on the console, a relic of the old station, and hummed the tune from the music box. The one that had played on her bedside table since she was a child. A simple, haunting melody. Across the room, a battle was being fought in flashes of light and sound. Leo and Anya versus Valentina's remaining guards, who had poured into the room from hidden panels. Leo moved with a desperate, protective fury. A whirlwind of violence carving a path toward Clementine, guarding her flank. On the screen, a new line appeared. Key accepted. Activating protocol. Lullaby. It wasn't a logic bomb. It wasn't a destructive pulse. It was something else. On every single darkened monitor in the room, a new image began to resolve. Not a map. Not data. A face. Maxwell DeWitt's face. Her father. It was a recording. He was sitting in the study of their Malibu home, the firelight crackling behind him. He looked old, tired, but his eyes held a deep, gentle calm. "Hello, Valentina," the recorded image of her father said, his voice filling the control room, a ghost speaking to the living. "If you are hearing this, it means my daughter is safe, and you are not. You wanted to see my network, my web, and so I will show it to you." On the monitors, the face of Maxwell DeWitt dissolved. It was replaced by a cascading waterfall of information, not just Serafina's network, but Leo's entire operational history. Every mission, every kill, every report filed to the GRU, and more. Every piece of blackmail Serafina had ever used on him. Every psychological profile, every vulnerability she had exploited. His entire life, laid bare. "You wanted a weapon," her father's voice continued, a gentle, relentless tide. "You wanted to break a man and remake him in your image. But a man is not a tool. He is a story. And you, Valentina, were just a chapter in his. A very ugly one. Valentina froze, her pistol held loosely in her hand, her face a mask of disbelief as she stared at the screens, at the ruin of her greatest creation being broadcast to anyone in the world who might be watching the dark web channels the protocol had just hijacked. His story doesn't end with you, the recording promised. It ends with a choice I give to him now, and to my daughter, who carries the truest part of me, the choice to build something new from the ashes of your empire. The performance, my dear, is finally over. With a final, gentle chord of music from the box, the screens went dark. The quantum device, its light sputtering, gave one final, bright pulse and then died. A victim of its own corrupted initialization. A fuse, blown by a song. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of breathing. The last of Valentina's guards lay dead. Valentina looked at the dead console, at the useless device, at the man she had sought to possess, now standing free of her across the room. Her empire was gone. Her power was a ghost. All she had left was the pistol in her hand and a primal, all-consuming fury. Her face contorted, a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, and she raised the gun, not at Leo, but at Clementine. You, she snarled, her voice a raw, guttural sound. This is all your fault. She squeezed the trigger, but Leo was already moving. He didn't throw himself in front of the bullet this time. He threw himself at Valentina. The shot went wide, ricocheting off a steel wall with a shriek. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. A raw, brutal struggle that had nothing to do with spycraft and everything to do with a decade of pain and ownership. It wasn't a fight. It was an exorcism. Clementine stood frozen, watching the two broken people on the floor tear each other apart. She saw the desperation in Valentina's eyes, the final, thrashing death throes of a spider fallen from its web. She saw the grim, absolute finality in Leo's face as he fought, not to kill, but to end. With a final, desperate surge, Valentina managed to bring the pistol up, her finger finding the trigger one last time. But Anya was there. Her boot came down on Valentina's wrist with a sickening crunch. The pistol skittered across the floor. Anya's rifle was pressed to the back of Serafina's head. The fight was over. Leo pushed himself up, bleeding from a new cut on his cheekbone, his chest heaving. He looked down at the woman who had been his creator, his tormentor, his shadow. She was disarmed, defeated. Her power evaporated into the sterile air of the base. He could have ended it. He should have ended it. Instead, he looked at Clementine. He walked over to her, his gaze never leaving her face, and gently took her arm. "Let's go," he said, his voice quiet, final. "Leo?" Anya said, her question unspoken. "Leave her," he commanded. "Let the world see what's left when you build a kingdom on lies." They left her there, a broken queen on the floor of her shattered ice castle, a prisoner of her own failure. They walked out of the control room, not as victors, but as survivors. The sounds of Julian's frantic voice coming through their comms, guiding them back through the labyrinth to the sea. The journey back to the submarine was a silent, numb pilgrimage. The world had been saved, not by a bomb, but by a truth. By a father's love, encoded in a song. As the submarine submerged, leaving the barren rock of Bouvet Island and all its ghosts behind, Clementine stood with Leo at the periscope, watching the ice-choked water swallow them whole. "It's over," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "No," Leo replied, his gaze fixed on the impenetrable darkness outside. "It's different now." He was right. The silence that followed was not the tense, waiting silence of a hunt, but the vast, uncertain emptiness of a world without an enemy. The vinyl strip lay on a table in the wardroom, a useless artifact, its song sung. Valentina Cortez was in custody, her secrets laid bare for the world to dissect. Leo was a ghost without a master, a weapon with no war to fight. When they finally surfaced, it was in the placid, sun-dappled waters of the North Sea, near a small, private airfield in Scotland. A nondescript jet was waiting. Julian was already on it, his face pale with relief. They flew in silence, the endless green of the Scottish Highlands a world away from the ice and the sea. They landed on the small, private airstrip behind the house in the Cotswolds. It was just as she remembered it. The rose bushes, the stone wall, the quiet, unassuming dignity of the place. Home. But it wasn't. The house was just a collection of rooms, filled with the echoes of a life that no longer existed. The silence there was different. It was a silence of choices, of endings and beginnings. Julian busied himself with the logistics, coordinating with international agencies, handling the fallout, managing the narrative. He was in his element, a maestro conducting the chaotic symphony of the aftermath. Anya kept a respectful, watchful distance, a silent guardian in the gardens, her job done but her duty lingering. Leo stood by the window in the study, the same window her father had stood at, looking out at the rain-slicked green of the hills. He was a fixture in the house, a quiet presence whose future was as unwritten as her own. He came to find her in the library that evening. She was sitting in her father's leather armchair, holding the worn copy of The Little Princes she had found on the side table. "The Norwegian authorities have her," he said, his voice low, filling the quiet room. "She's in a black site. No contact. No public trial. She's been erased." "Good," Clementine said, her fingers tracing the faded illustration on the book's cover. He crossed the room, stopping in front of her chair. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "I have to go," he said. The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. She looked up at him, a familiar, hollow ache spreading through her chest. She had known this was coming. The war was over. The soldier had to leave the field. "I know. I'm a loose end, Clementine. For them. For your government. For a dozen other agencies that suddenly have a file on a ghost named Petrov. I can't stay. Not just for me. For you." He knelt down in front of her, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, caging her in without touching. "The world is safe from her. It's not safe from what I represent." "And where will you go?" she whispered, the question tasting of loss. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch a fleeting electric spark. "Somewhere the sun is warm, where the loudest noise is the ocean. I have to find out who I am when I'm not running toward you, or away from her." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was more intimate than that. a shared breath in the quiet space between them, a farewell. Then he stood and walked out of the room, his footsteps receding down the hall, leaving her with the scent of rain and the faint, lingering warmth of his skin. He was gone by morning. A note on the kitchen table, next to the coffee maker. A single, folded piece of paper. No address, no name, just a line of music, drawn in neat, confident pencil. The melody from her father's music box. The song that had saved them all. A promise. 6 months later, the house in the Cotswolds was filled with a different kind of life. Not actors, not spies, but children. Clementine had turned the sprawling estate into a sanctuary, a school for the children of intelligence operatives who had fallen in the line of duty, a place for ghosts to have a childhood. She taught them literature and theater, not spycraft. She taught them how to build worlds with words, not dismantle them with code. Julian ran the foundation that funded it all. His acumen for finance now turned toward nurturing instead of neutralizing. He was happy, settled, the frantic energy of the chase replaced by a steady, purposeful calm. Anya had stayed on, not as a bodyguard, but as the head of security for the school, a fierce, protective presence for the small, fragile lives within its walls. The world had settled into a new, uneasy normal. The data leak had sparked a wave of governmental reforms, a quiet, systemic cleansing. Valentina Cortez's name was a ghost story whispered in intelligence circles, a cautionary tale. Clementine was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes, the scent of damp earth and blossoms thick in the air. The vinyl strip was gone, buried in a sealed vault in Switzerland, a relic of a war that was won. She was at peace, or at least, she told herself she was. One evening, a package arrived. It was a small, flat box, postmarked from a country that didn't exist, a place known only to spies and smugglers. There was no return address. Her heart gave a painful, familiar lurch. She took it into the study, closing the door behind her. Julian watched her from the doorway, his expression concerned. "Clem?" She didn't answer. She opened the box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single antique silver locket. It wasn't hers. It was Valentina's. She'd seen it in photographs, a constant presence around the serpent's neck. With a trembling hand, she opened it. On one side was a faded photograph of a young, dark-haired boy, Leo, but not the haunted man she knew. This boy was perhaps 12, with an open, guileless smile. He was wearing the uniform of a Russian boarding school. On the other side was not a lock of hair, but a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper. With a pair of tweezers, she carefully unrolled it. It was a microdot, a message. She fed it into a small projector she kept in a hidden drawer, a device her father had insisted she learn to use. The wall of the study lit up with a single typed sentence. "A debt is paid, but the serpent has 2 heads." A cold dread washed over her, a chill that had nothing to do with the English rain. The locket wasn't a trophy. It was a warning. A message from Leo. He hadn't just disappeared. He had gone hunting again. And he had found something. Someone. Valentina was a 2-headed coin. The public face, the architect of the empire, was in a black site. But the other head, the silent partner, the hidden power, was still out there. The performance was never over. It had just moved to a different stage. The locket lay on the polished mahogany of the study desk, a malevolent little star. Clementine traced its cool, ornate surface with her fingertip. A debt is paid, but the serpent has two heads. The words were a brand on the inside of her eyelids. Leo hadn't sent it as a romantic memento. It was a field report, wrapped in enigma. He had uncovered the next layer of the conspiracy, and in doing so, had painted a target on both of their backs. Who is the other head? Julian's voice was tight. He stood beside her, his usual composure frayed at the edges. He was no longer just her brother. He was the chief of staff for a war he hadn't known was still being fought. I don't know, Clementine admitted, her gaze fixed on the boy's smiling face in the locket. Valentina was the architect, the visionary. Her ambition was a fire you could see from space. This is something else. Something quieter. Someone who preferred the shadows even to Valentina's twilight. Marcus Thorne's voice crackled through the secure line they'd established. A lifeline to Geneva. The microdots encoding is pre-Cold War. Primitive, which makes it untraceable. But the metallurgy of the locket itself is interesting. The silver is marked with rare hallmarks from a specific Swiss foundry, one that went bankrupt in the late 80s. They specialized in bespoke items for a very exclusive clientele. One name keeps popping up in their liquidation records. A holding company called Janus Global. Janus, the two-faced god. The symbolism was not subtle. Pull it apart, Marcus, Clementine commanded. Everything. Every shell. Every subsidiary. I want to know who bought the silver, who designed the locket, and who the hell is Janus. The search was a descent into a new kind of hell. The digital maze of Janus Global made Serafina's network look like a child's connect the dots. It was a ghost of a corporation, layered and encrypted with a patience that spoke of decades, not years. It was less a business and more a geological formation of secrets. For days, Thorne came up with nothing but digital dust. The second head was a master of silence. Then, a crack. A single, dormant account linked to Janus Global showed a recent withdrawal. Not millions, but a few €1,000. The destination, a small, antiquarian bookshop in Paris. Librairie des Mirages. The purchase, a rare first edition. The buyer's name, V. Dubois. He's sloppy, Julian noted, a grim satisfaction in his tone. Or he wants us to find him. Or he's using a dead drop, Clementine countered. The book isn't the message. The bookshop is. Paris in the fall was a watercolor of gray and gold. The bookshop was tucked away in the Latin Quarter, a dusty, forgotten cavern that smelled of old paper, leather, and decaying dreams. Anya, posing as a tourist, scouted the location. The owner was an old man named Gilles, a man whose entire life seemed to be contained within the four walls of his shop. The surveillance was clean. Too clean. Clementine entered the shop alone, the bell above the door chiming a gentle, lonely note. She moved through the narrow aisles, her fingers trailing over the spines of forgotten histories. Gilles watched her from behind his counter, his eyes bright and bird-like, devoid of any real curiosity. He was a fixture, not a player. She found the section on Russian poetry and picked up a volume of Akhmatova. As she leafed through the brittle pages, her phone buzzed with a text from Anya. 2 blocks north. Café de Flore. Man with a scarred left hand. He's been watching the shop for an hour. Not law enforcement. Clementine replaced the book. The bookshop wasn't the dead drop. It was the observation point. She paid for a small, cheap novel and left. The bells chime her farewell. She didn't go to the cafe. She walked into the nearest metro station and disappeared into the city's subterranean veins. They found him. The man with the scarred hand was a former French legionnaire, a mercenary whose specialty was urban surveillance. He was good, but not good enough to evade Anya. They took him in a quiet alleyway. The swift, brutal efficiency of the extraction a grim reminder of the world they now inhabited. He talked quickly. He'd been hired by a man he only knew as Monsieur Janus. The payment was wired to an untraceable account. His job was simple. Watch the bookshop and report if anyone matching Clementine's description showed a specific interest in Russian literature. He had a secondary instruction. If she bought the Akhmatova, he was to give her a note. He nervously handed it over. The note was a single piece of cardstock, like a bookmark. On it was a handwritten line of poetry. Je suis le fantôme dans les murs de votre maison. I am the ghost in the walls of your house. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A confession. Who is he? Clementine asked, her blood running cold. This, Janus. Thorne's answer, when it came, was a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of their reality. The name of the holding company wasn't the only thing he'd found. He'd cross-referenced the Swiss metallurgist's records with another set of data. The original investor lists for the tech firm that had built the core processor for her father's system, the one Valentina had stolen. One name appeared on both lists, a silent partner, a source of early, crucial capital. A man named Alistair Finch, the suave, sympathetic host of the morning news show in London, the man who had sat across from her, feigning concern as she'd burned Valentina's world to the ground on live television. The performance. Within the performance. He wasn't just a journalist. He was the other head of the serpent, and he had been inside her house, not the one in the Cotswolds, but the one in her mind. He had listened to her story, analyzed her trauma, and used it to map her soul. The bookshop was a test, Clementine realized, pacing the floor of their Paris safe house, an apartment overlooking the manicured perfection of the Jardin du Luxembourg. He wasn't there. He was seeing if I'd follow the trail, seeing if I was still the same person who walked onto that stage in London, if I was predictable. He's not just a silent partner, Julian said, staring at Finch's face on a tablet. He's a ghost maker. His specialty is psychological warfare. He doesn't break people with pain, he reshapes them with narrative. Valentina was the scalpel. Finch is the architect of the whole operation. The plan that took shape was born of desperation and a grim, audacious irony. Alistair Finch had used the global stage as a weapon. So would they. They would not attack him in the shadows. They would invite him into the light. Using a network of shell companies and charitable trusts that Julian could now conjure from thin air, they created a global summit. The DeWitt Foundation for Ethical Governance would host a live, televised panel discussion on the future of information in a post-trust world. It was the kind of self-important, world-saving event Alistair Finch could never resist. He was the keynote speaker. Clementine would not be on the stage. She would be in the control room, watching. Leo, who they had managed to contact through a dead drop code embedded in the mercenaries' payment details, would be in the audience. A ghost watching another ghost. Anya and her new team would secure the perimeter. The stage was set. The summit was held in Berlin, a city whose history was a testament to walls falling and worlds changing. The auditorium was a cathedral of glass and steel. packed with journalists, academics, and politicians. The world was watching. Finch was in his element. He paced the stage, a charismatic prophet of the coming information apocalypse. His words a seductive blend of fear and opportunity. He spoke of the Cortez incident not as a criminal conspiracy, but as a chaotic failure of the old system, a tragedy that necessitated a new, more enlightened form of global oversight. He was selling the serpent's bite as the cure for its venom. From the control room, Clementine watched him on a bank of monitors, her face a mask of cold composure. He was good, better than she'd imagined. He wasn't just reading the news, he was writing the future. He's building to it, she murmured into her mic. Then it happened. A slide appeared on the giant screen behind Finch. A photo of Maxwell DeWitt. And beside him, a photo of a much younger Alistair Finch, standing together at a tech conference in the late 90s. "You all knew my friend Maxwell as a visionary," Finch said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. "But few knew the private torment he endured. The paranoia, the obsession. He created a system he couldn't control, a weapon of immense power that he feared would fall into the wrong hands. He even feared it would fall into the hands of his own daughter." The screen changed again, a photo of Clementine, looking distraught, leaving the London police station. A carefully chosen, unflattering shot. "He sought my help," Finch continued. "A masterclass in emotional manipulation. Together we tried to contain the threat, to protect the world and her from herself. But the damage was done. Her fragile psyche, warped by her father's legacy, made her susceptible to the machinations of a monster like Cortez. He was rewriting their story, erasing her victory, her agency, reframing her as a broken weapon, a tragic victim. He was turning their performance into a tragedy in which he was the misunderstood hero. "Ms. DeWitt is not well," he said, looking directly into the primary camera, the camera he knew she was watching. "She is a danger to herself and others. The foundation she runs is a front, a continuation of her father's paranoid work. I ask you, the world, to see her not as a leader, but as a patient, in need of our help, in need of our protection." The control room was silent. Julian stood beside her, his hands clenched into fists. "He's not just discrediting you," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "He's painting a target on your back. He's giving every agency on the planet a reason to come after you." "He's not just talking to them," Clementine said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "He's talking to Leo. He's telling him he failed, that the woman he fought for is broken, a lost cause." On the monitor showing the audience, she found him. Leo, sitting in a back row, almost invisible. She saw the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his shoulders. Finch's poison was finding its mark. "It's time," Clementine said into her calm. "Anya, secure the exits. No one leaves. Julian, kill the broadcast feed. We're going live." Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard. On stage, Finch's confident image froze for a split second, then dissolved. The screen behind him went black. The house lights came up. Finch looked around, confused, as the live satellite feed was cut. Then the screen came back to life. It showed the control room, and it showed Clementine. She was standing now, the camera framed on her, a calm, commanding presence. "Hello, Alistair," she said, her voice echoing through the now silent auditorium, broadcast to the millions who had been tuned in. Thank you for that touching eulogy for a life that hasn't ended. You always did have a flair for dramatics. Alistair Finch's face was a picture of frozen disbelief. He was a creature of the prepared script, of the controlled narrative. He was naked, without them. You speak of ghosts in the walls, Clementine continued, her tone measured, precise. But you never specified which one. You were there at the beginning. You saw my father's creation not as a weapon, but as a key. You didn't want to destroy it. You wanted to possess it. But he saw you. He saw the emptiness behind your charming facade. That's why he locked you out. That's why he built a system you couldn't break. She held up her phone. On its screen was the image from the locket. The boy with the guileless smile. Leo. But this was a version Finch had never seen. A version before the conditioning. Before the torture. A version of pure potential. You speak of my fragility, Clementine said, her gaze boring through the camera, through the screen, directly into Finch's soul. Let's talk about yours. Your entire identity is a construct, a performance for an audience of one. Yourself. You don't build. You corrupt. You don't lead. You manipulate. You're not a head of the serpent, Alistair. You're the tail that's been wagging the dog. On the screen next to her, a new image appeared. A live feed from a secure location. Valentina Cortez, sitting in a sterile, white room. She was thinner, paler, but her eyes held the same predatory fire. She was looking directly at the camera, at Finch. He always underestimated me, she said, her voice a rasp of contempt. And he overestimated you. You think you're the puppet master? You were just the one who held the strings while I built the stage. The broadcast was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a two-pronged attack that stripped Finch of his power and his partner simultaneously. He had built his empire on secrets. They were burning it to the ground with the truth. The audience was in turmoil. Journalists were scrambling, their phones out, recording everything. Politicians were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The narrative had shattered. And in the back row, Leo watched the stage, then the screen, showing Clementine's face. He saw her strength, her resolve. She wasn't a victim to be protected. She was a warrior, standing her ground. He slowly stood up, a single, silent figure in a sea of chaos. Finch finally found his voice, a shrill, desperate sound. This is a trick, a fabrication. You're working with her, with Cortez. Am I? Clementine said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. Or did she just provide the final piece of the puzzle? The proof that your empire was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. You used her ambition, and she used your resources. You both used people. You used him. She gestured toward the audience, toward Leo. Finch's eyes darted to the back row, and for the first time, a flicker of real fear crossed his face. He saw Leo moving, not toward the stage, but toward the aisles. Not to attack, but to be seen. The performance is over, Alistair, Clementine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried through the hall with the weight of a final judgment. The reviews are in. You've been cancelled. On the screen behind her, a new image appeared. A live feed of international law enforcement agents storming Janus Global's headquarters in Geneva, a dozen other locations simultaneously. Marcus Thorne, their unseen quartermaster, had been busy. Finch was trapped, on the stage, on the screen, in the real world. The walls were closing in from all sides. He looked wildly around, searching for an exit, an escape route, a way to regain control of the story. But there was none. He made a final, fatal mistake. He lunged for the moderator, grabbing her microphone, a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. It was the move of a cornered animal, not a master strategist. It was also the signal. Two figures detached themselves from the press corps in the front row. They moved with the silent, fluid grace of predators. Not agents, not police. They were Anya's people, dressed as journalists. They reached the stage in seconds, their movements a blur of coordinated efficiency. They didn't draw weapons, they didn't need to. They simply converged on him, a human cage of absolute professionalism, and escorted the blustering, disbelieving Alistair Finch from the stage. His performance was over. The world would see the trial, not the triumph. The auditorium slowly emptied, the murmuring crowd a tide of confusion and revelation. Clementine remained in the control room, watching the screens until they were filled with the faces of her team. Anya giving a crisp, all-clear report. Julian already fielding calls from world leaders. And Leo standing alone in the now empty hall, looking up at the camera, looking at her. She finally left the control room and walked down the long, empty corridor that led to the stage. The house lights were low, casting long, dramatic shadows across the empty seats. She stepped out into the cavernous space, her footsteps echoing. He was waiting for her in the center of the aisle. Not a ghost, not a weapon, but just a man. The haunted look in his eyes had not vanished, but it was now joined by something else. A quiet, weary peace. "You didn't need my help," he said, his voice a low, rough timbre in the silence. "I needed you to be there," she replied softly, stopping a few feet from him. "To see it for yourself." He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of their shared history passing between them in the quiet air. "When Finch said you were broken, I believed him for a second. Not because of him, but because of me. Because everything I touch, I seem to break." "You didn't break me, Leo," she said, taking the final step that closed the distance between them. "You were the one thing in all of this that was real. The performance was the world we had to survive. This is us." She reached up and gently traced the line of his jaw, a touch she had denied herself for so long. He didn't pull away. He leaned into it, a small, almost imperceptible surrender. He was no longer running toward her or away from a ghost. He was simply standing still, with her. "So, how does it feel now? Knowing that protection and betrayal can wear the same face. That sometimes the person who watches over you is the one deciding what you're allowed to know." If you felt a little unsettled, a little closer to the characters than you expected, that's not an accident. That's where this story lives. I'll be right here when you're ready for more.